Forsaken at the altar. When a mail-order bride is abandoned at a frontier train station with $17 and a torn wedding dress, desperation drives her into a saloon, where salvation arrives in the form of a silent widower, twin boys who've forgotten how to smile, and a second chance neither of them was looking for. If you're ready for a story of redemption, found family, and love forged in the fires of the Montana frontier, stay with me until the very end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see just how far Clara's journey reaches across the world. The heat arrived first. It came before the crowd, before the whispers, before the final humiliation. Clara Bellamy. Harper stood on the platform of Bitterroot Station with the sun beating down on her shoulders like a physical weight, her wedding dress clinging to her back in damp patches that spread with each passing minute. The fabric, once pristine ivory silk ordered from a catalog with her last savings, now showed every mile of dusty travel, every hour of anxious waiting. She'd been standing there for 3 hours. The telegram in her gloved hand had gone soft with sweat and repeated reading, though the words never changed no matter how many times her eyes traced them. Engagement terminated. Stop. Do not proceed. Stop. Letter follows. Stop. No explanation, no apology, just 11 words that had shattered the future she'd crossed half a continent to claim. Clara watched a tumbleweed drift past the station platform, pushed by wind that offered no relief from the oppressive heat. Montana in August was nothing like the pleasant descriptions in Mr. Harper's letters. Those letters had painted pictures of cool mountain breezes, crystal streams, and a comfortable home waiting for a bride who would bring refinement to the frontier. They'd spoken of respect, partnership, and security, everything a 32-year-old schoolteacher from Philadelphia had been told she'd never find after her father's debts had consumed her inheritance and left her reputation in tatters. The letters had been lies. Or perhaps not lies exactly. Perhaps Mr. Silas Harper had simply changed his mind upon receiving her photograph, the honest one she'd sent after his third letter, the one showing her face as it actually was rather than the flattering portrait from her youth. Perhaps he'd found someone younger, prettier, more suitable for a man of his standing. Perhaps she simply wasn't worth the trouble anymore. Miss? You planning to stand there all day, or are you waiting for the platform to grow shade? Clara turned to find the station master watching her with a mixture of pity and impatience. He was a thin man with a weathered face, his shirt yellowed at the collar, suspenders straining over a slight paunch. I'm waiting for someone, she said, though even she could hear the hollowness in her words. Been waiting 3 hours now. Train's long gone, and anyone expecting you would have been here by now. He shifted his weight, not unkindly. Look, miss, I don't mean to pry, but this is Bitterroot. Ain't exactly safe for a woman alone, especially one dressed like that. You got people here? Somewhere to go? Clara's fingers tightened on her carpet bag. Everything she owned in the world was inside it. 2 dresses, a nightgown, a Bible she no longer opened, a photograph of parents long dead, and $17 in carefully folded bills. I'm expected at the Harper Ranch, she said, lifting her chin. I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding. Mr. Harper will send someone shortly. The station master's expression shifted to something that looked like genuine concern. Harper? Silas Harper, out at Copper Ridge. Yes. Do you know him? Know of him. The man scratched his jaw, choosing his words carefully. Miss, I don't know what arrangement you had with Silas Harper, but he left town 4 days ago. Took the eastbound train with a woman half his age, banker's daughter from Helena. Had wedding rings on their fingers and everything. The platform seemed to tilt beneath Clara's feet. That's impossible, she whispered. We've been corresponding for 6 months. He sent for me. He paid my passage. Did he? The station master's face softened further. Or did you pay it yourself, thinking there'd be reimbursement on arrival? Clara's silence was answer enough. The man sighed, pulling off his cap to run a hand through thinning hair. Listen, miss, I've seen this before. Some men write letters to half a dozen women, seeing who'll bite. Others get cold feet when reality shows up on their doorstep. Either way, you standing here in a wedding dress ain't changing the fact that Silas Harper's married to someone else now, and you're alone in a town that don't look kindly on women in your position. My position? Clara's voice came out sharper than intended. I'm a school teacher. A respectable woman who traveled here in good faith based on promises made. Respectable woman wearing a wedding dress with no groom, no family, no prospects. And by the look of your face, not much money either. He wasn't being cruel, just honest in the way frontier people were. That's the position I'm talking about. Bitterroot ain't Philadelphia or Boston or wherever you came from. We got maybe 300 people here, most of them men. The respectable women are already spoken for, and the others, he trailed off meaningfully. Clara felt heat rising in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the sun. I am not one of the others. Didn't say you were. But that dress and that situation? Town won't see the difference. My advice? Get on the next eastbound train, comes through tomorrow noon, and go back where you came from. I can't. The admission burned. I have no one back there. No home. No position. The station master's expression shifted to pity. She couldn't bear to witness. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a worn business card. Then you'd better find work fast. There's a boarding house 2 streets over, Mrs. Henley's place. She's decent, and her rates are fair. Might let you stay on credit if you explain your situation, might not. Beyond that, he paused, seeming to weigh whether to continue. The saloon's always looking for piano players, or serving girls, if you're desperate enough. He pressed the card into her hand and walked away before she could respond, leaving Clara alone on the platform with the sun sinking lower and the shadows growing long. The boarding house refused her. Mrs. Henley took one look at Clara's wedding dress and tear-stained face and closed the door with a firmness that spoke volumes. No rooms available, she'd said, though Clara had glimpsed empty beds through an open doorway. No rooms for women of questionable character who showed up alone in bridal attire with stories about abandoned arrangements. The next boarding house didn't even open the door. By the time full darkness fell, Clara had walked every street of Bitterroot twice, her feet blistering in thin shoes never meant for unpaved roads. She'd inquired at the general store about work. The owner had laughed. She'd asked at the hotel about rooms. The clerk had quoted prices she couldn't afford for even a single night. You could try the church, a kind-faced woman had suggested, though her expression remained guarded. Pastor might know of someone needing help with washing or sewing. But the church had been dark and locked, a handwritten sign indicating the pastor was visiting congregants 30 miles north and wouldn't return for 3 days. 3 days. Clara had enough money for perhaps one meal, certainly not lodging. And the temperature, which had been oppressive during daylight, now dropped with the swift brutality of mountain nights, leaving her shivering in silk that offered no protection against the cold. She found herself standing outside the Golden Bell Saloon, not by choice, but by the simple fact that it was the only building still lit and open as the town settled into sleep. Through the dusty windows, she could see men gathered around tables, glasses catching lamplight, smoke curling toward rafters. She could hear the tinny notes of an out-of-tune piano, laughter that sounded more aggressive than joyful, the clink of coins and cards. Everything in her Philadelphia upbringing screamed at her to walk away. But Philadelphia didn't matter anymore. Her upbringing had been funded by her father's schemes, and those debts had consumed everything, including her future. The respectable world had closed its doors the moment his fraud was exposed, leaving her with nothing but a teaching certificate and the desperate hope that a frontier marriage might offer escape. That hope was ash now, scattered by Montana wind. Clara touched the door of the Golden Bell Saloon and felt the wood warm beneath her palm from the heat inside. She could smell whiskey and sweat, tobacco and something else, something desperate and hungry that made her stomach clench. Just to ask about the piano position, she told herself, just to see if there's honest work available. Nothing more. She pushed the door open. The saloon fell silent. It wasn't a gradual quiet, it was immediate and total, as if someone had physically cut every voice mid-word. 30 pairs of eyes turned toward the doorway where Clara stood in her ruined wedding dress, dust-stained silk gleaming in lamplight, dark hair falling from its pins, face showing every mile of travel and every hour of despair. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman who had nowhere else to go. Well, well. The voice came from behind the bar, smooth and cultured in a way that seemed wrong in this rough place. What have we here? The speaker was a man in his 40s, well-dressed by frontier standards, with silver threading through dark hair, and eyes that assessed Clara with the casual precision of someone accustomed to evaluating merchandise. He moved from behind the bar with practiced grace, weaving
This
through
story
tables
was
toward her.
posted on the channel The
"I'm
Rusty
looking
Saddle.
for work,"
Please do
Claire
not
said,
repost
forcing
it
her
in any
voice
form.
steady. "The station master mentioned you might need a piano player." "Did he now?" The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. "How thoughtful of dear Mr. Peterson to send business my way. I'm Nathaniel Burke, proprietor of this establishment. And you are?" "Clara Bellamy." She almost added Harper, but caught herself. That name meant nothing now. "I'm a school teacher from Philadelphia. I can play piano, and I can read music. I'm looking for respectable employment." Burke's smile widened. "Respectable. I like that." He circled her slowly, close enough that she could smell pomade and whiskey. Respectable employment in a wedding dress at 10 o'clock at night, walking into a saloon alone. "That's quite a story already, Miss Bellamy." Heat flooded Clara's cheeks. "My circumstances are my own affair. I'm simply inquiring about the piano position." "We do need a piano player," Burke interrupted smoothly. "Previous one caught the fever last month and never recovered. Terrible shame. The gentlemen do enjoy music with their evening entertainment." He gestured toward the out-of-tune upright in the corner. "Can you play well enough to keep them happy?" "I was trained at the Philadelphia Conservatory," Clara said, lifting her chin. "I can play anything you require." "Anything?" Burke's tone carried suggestion that made her skin crawl. "That's quite a claim. Why don't you show us? Give these good men a sample of your talents." Clara moved toward the piano, grateful for something to do with her hands, some purpose to steady her shaking. The bench was scarred and uneven, the piano worse than she'd imagined. Keys sticking, strings badly tuned, the whole instrument reeking of spilled beer and neglect. She positioned her fingers over the keys and began to play. She chose Mozart, something beautiful and complex, something that demanded every ounce of skill she possessed. The piano fought her, but she fought back, pulling music from the damaged instrument through sheer force of will. She poured everything into it, all her anger at Silas Harper, all her grief for her lost future, all her terror at being alone and unprotected in a place that saw her as prey. The saloon remained silent as she played. She kept her eyes on the keys, unwilling to see the faces watching her, unwilling to acknowledge what she was doing and where she was doing it. When she finished, the silence held for 3 heartbeats. Then someone whistled, low and appreciative, and the spell broke. "That's real pretty," a voice called. "Can you play something a man can dance to?" "Play Lorena," another shouted. "No, play Buffalo Gals." Burke raised a hand, and the voices quieted immediately. The gesture told Clara more about the power dynamics in this room than any words could have. This was his domain, and these men knew it. "Gentlemen, please," Burke said smoothly. "Give the lady a moment to catch her breath." He moved closer to Clara, placing a hand on her shoulder that felt like ownership. "That was exceptional, Miss Bellamy. Truly exceptional. I think we can come to an arrangement." "What sort of arrangement?" Clara asked carefully. "Piano playing, of course. What else?" Burke's expression was innocence itself, but his fingers tightened fractionally on her shoulder. "We open at noon, close around 3 in the morning. I'd expect you here for the evening crowd, say 7 o'clock until closing. You'd play requests, keep the atmosphere lively, encourage the men to stay and spend money. In exchange, I'd pay you $1 a night, plus room and board upstairs." $1 a night, $7 a week. It wasn't much, but it was survival. "And that's all?" Clara asked. "Just piano playing?" "Just piano playing," Burke confirmed. "Though, of course, if the gentlemen want to buy you drinks between sets, it would be rude to refuse. And conversation is part of the hospitality business, naturally, but piano playing is the primary duty, Scout's honor." He held up 3 fingers in mock oath, and several men chuckled. Claire's instincts screamed warning, but her options were brutally clear. She could accept this offer and have a bed tonight and food tomorrow, or she could walk back into the darkness with $17 and nowhere to go in a town that had already shown her how quickly doors could close. "I'll need to see this room first," she said. Burke's smile sharpened. "Of course. Right this way." He led her toward a narrow staircase at the back of the saloon, his hand moving from her shoulder to the small of her back. Too familiar, too presumptuous, but she forced herself not to pull away. Men watched them climb the stairs, their gazes heavy with speculation. The hallway upstairs was dim and narrow, doors lining both sides. Clara could hear sounds from behind some of them, laughter, low voices, rhythmic creaking that made her stomach turn. The air smelled of cheap perfume and sweat. Burke opened a door at the far end. "This one's available. Just came vacant." The room was tiny, barely large enough for a narrow bed, a washstand, and a small trunk. The window overlooked the alley behind the saloon, its glass so dirty that moonlight came through gray and filtered. The bed linens looked questionable, but it was shelter. It was safety from the night and the cold in the eyes of men who saw a woman alone as invitation. "I'll take it," Claire said, "but I want to be clear about my duties. I'll play piano from 7 until closing. I'll be polite to customers, but I'm not—" "I won't." "Of course not," Burke said smoothly. "You're a respectable lady, Miss Bellamy, a school teacher from Philadelphia. I would never suggest otherwise." He moved closer, backing her subtly toward the wall. "Though I should mention that tips from generous gentlemen can significantly improve your earnings. A smile here, a kind word there. These things encourage generosity, and who knows? Perhaps one of these fine men might offer you a better arrangement. Marriage, even. Stranger things have happened in Montana." His hand came up to touch her cheek, and Clara jerked away. "The piano position," she said firmly. "That's what I'm accepting, nothing else." Burke's expression hardened for just a moment, long enough for her to see the calculation behind the cultured facade. Then he smiled again and stepped back. "Of course, the piano position. You start tomorrow evening, 7 o'clock sharp." He moved toward the door, then paused. "One more thing, Miss Bellamy. That wedding dress, I'd change out of it before coming downstairs. Some of the gentlemen might get the wrong idea about what services you're offering. We wouldn't want any misunderstandings, would we?" He left before she could respond, closing the door behind him with a softness that was somehow more threatening than a slam. Claire stood alone in the small, dirty room and felt the full weight of her situation settle on her shoulders like a physical burden. She'd walked into a trap. Burke's words had been carefully chosen, his promises deliberately vague. The respectable piano playing would blur into something else. Buying drinks would lead to sitting with customers. Sitting would lead to touching. Touching would lead to expectations she couldn't meet without destroying what remained of herself. She knew how this story ended. She'd heard versions of it whispered in Philadelphia parlors, women who'd fallen from grace, who'd made compromises that seemed small at first but led inevitably downward until there was nothing left but survival. But what choice did she have? She had $17 and no prospects. The town had rejected her. The church was dark. The boarding houses had closed their doors. Clara moved to the window and looked out at the alley below. Trash littered the ground. A drunk man leaned against the wall, retching. 2 cats fought over something she couldn't see. This was her life now. This was what trusting Silas Harper's promises had earned her. She pulled off her wedding dress slowly, each button a small defeat. The silk whispered as it fell, pooling around her feet like surrender. She hung it on the single hook behind the door and stared at it. This dress she'd sewn herself with such hope, this symbol of a future that had been ash before she'd even arrived to claim it. Tomorrow she'd play piano in a saloon. She'd smile at drunk men and dodge grabbing hands and pretend this was all perfectly normal, perfectly fine, perfectly survivable. Tonight she'd sleep, if she could sleep, in this room that smelled of other women's desperation. Clara lay down on the questionable bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the saloon below bleeding through the thin floorboards. Laughter and shouting, glass breaking, the piano playing badly now that someone else had taken over, probably Burke himself, proving he didn't actually need her, reminding her that she was replaceable. She thought about prayer but couldn't find the words. The faith she'd carried from Philadelphia seemed as useless here as her wedding dress. What she felt instead was a cold, clarifying anger. Anger at Silas Harper for his lies. Anger at her father for the debts that had destroyed her prospects. Anger at herself for being naive enough to believe that frontier marriage could be anything other than another form of transaction. But beneath the anger was something harder, something that had kept her standing when her father's crimes were exposed, something that had gotten her through the crossing and the waiting and the humiliation of this endless day. Stubbornness. Clara Bellamy had survived scandal in Philadelphia. She'd survived the journey west. She would survive this too, somehow. She would play piano and save money and find a way out before Burke's carefully constructed trap closed completely. She had to.
This
Because
story
the
was posted on the
alternative,
channel The
the slow
Rusty
slide
Saddle.
into becoming
Please do
what
not
this town
repost it in
already
any
assumed
form.
she was. That was a death she refused to die. Clara closed her eyes and forced herself to breathe slowly, steadily, as if calm could be created through sheer will. Tomorrow she'd find the church pastor. She'd inquire about teaching positions in surrounding towns. She'd write letters to employment agencies in Helena and Billings. She'd find a way forward that didn't involve Nathaniel Burke's smile or the knowing looks of men who thought a woman alone was fair game. Sleep came eventually, fitful and shallow, broken by sounds from the rooms around her and the persistent certainty that she'd made a terrible mistake. But morning came too, as it always did. And with morning came the realization that she'd survived the night. It was something. It would have to be enough. 8. The next evening, Clara descended the stairs at precisely 7 o'clock wearing her plain gray dress, the practical one she'd packed for traveling. She'd pinned her hair severely back and scrubbed her face clean of any color that might be mistaken for paint. She looked, she hoped, like exactly what she was, a schoolteacher forced into temporary circumstances. The saloon was already half full, men gathering after long days of work in mines and ranches, seeking release in whiskey and cards. They looked up as she appeared, and she saw recognition flicker across their faces. This was the woman from last night, the one in the wedding dress, the one with the story written all over her. Burke materialized from behind the bar, his smile sharp and proprietorial. "Miss Bellamy, right on time. I appreciate punctuality." He gestured toward the piano. "The gentlemen are eager to hear you play." Clara moved to the piano bench, positioning herself with her back to most of the room. She placed her hands on the keys and began to play, something neutral and pleasant, background music that wouldn't draw too much attention. For the first hour, it went as promised. Men drank and talked and played cards, and she played piano, and the arrangement seemed almost workable. Then the second hour began, and the whiskey started talking louder than the men. "Hey, piano girl," a voice called. "Come over here and play something at our table." Clara ignored him, continuing her current piece. "I said come over here." The voice was louder now, aggressive. "You too good to play requests?" "The piano doesn't move, sir," Clara called back without turning. "But I'm happy to play any song you'd like from where I'm sitting." Laughter rippled through the room, some appreciating her backbone, others anticipating conflict. "She's got spirit," someone said. "Spirit'll get knocked out of her soon enough," another replied. Clara's fingers stumbled over the keys, but she recovered quickly, forcing herself to keep playing. Don't react, don't engage, just play the piano and get through the night. But the drunk man wasn't finished. She heard chair legs scraping, heavy footsteps crossing the wooden floor. Then hands were on her shoulders, pulling her up from the bench, spinning her around. "When I tell you to come to my table," the man said, his breath reeking of rot-gut whiskey, "you come to my table. Understand?" He was massive, over 6 feet tall, with a thick beard and arms like tree trunks. His eyes were bloodshot and unfocused, but his grip on her arms was painfully tight. "Let me go," Clara said, keeping her voice level despite the fear flooding her system. "Let you go? I just bought you a drink." He gestured toward a table where a glass of amber liquid sat waiting. "Least you can do is sit with me while I enjoy it." "I don't drink while I'm working," Clara said. "You calling me a liar?" "Burke said girls here are friendly, said they appreciate generosity." The man's fingers dug deeper into her arms. "I'm being generous. Now come sit down before I lose my temper." Clara looked around desperately. Burke was behind the bar, polishing glasses, deliberately not meeting her eyes. Other men watched with varying expressions, some uncomfortable, most simply waiting to see how this would play out. No one moved to help. This was the trap she'd sensed last night. This was where respectable piano playing transformed into something else, where refusing meant consequences she couldn't afford. "Please," she said quietly, "you're hurting me." "Not yet, I'm not," the drunk man said, pulling her closer. "But we can go upstairs and I'll show you what hurting really—" He never finished the sentence. One moment he was gripping Clara's arms, his face inches from hers. The next moment he was flat on his back on the saloon floor, blood streaming from his nose, and a new figure stood where he'd been standing. Clara staggered backward, free but disoriented. The man who'd intervened was huge, taller even than her attacker, with shoulders that seemed to fill the doorway and hands that looked capable of breaking wood with casual effort. He wore work clothes, dusty and worn, and his face was weathered in the way of men who spent lives outdoors. His hair was dark and slightly too long, and his expression was absolutely neutral. No anger, no aggression, just quiet competence. But the most striking thing about him was the two small boys clinging to his legs like barnacles, identical in every way, their faces pressed against their father's trousers as if trying to disappear. The drunk man on the floor groaned and tried to sit up. "You broke my nose." "You'll live," the big man said. His voice was deep and quiet, the kind of voice that didn't need volume to carry weight. He looked down at the drunk with something that might have been pity. "Touch her again and I'll break more than that." "Cal Redfeather," Burke's voice cut across the room, suddenly sharp. "I don't recall inviting you into my establishment." So this was Cal Redfeather. Clara had heard the name whispered in town, the mountain man, the hermit, the Sioux widower who lived 20 miles north and rarely came to Bitterroot except for supplies. Cal turned slowly to face Burke, the twin boys still attached to his legs. "Didn't know I needed an invitation to stop a man from assaulting a woman." "Miss Bellamy works here," Burke said smoothly. "What happens between her and the customers is establishment business." "That's so." Cal's expression didn't change, but something in his tone made several men shift uncomfortably. "Establishment business includes letting drunk men drag women upstairs against their will?" "I'm sure there was a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding," Cal interrupted quietly. "Just a man who doesn't know how to treat women." He looked at Clara directly for the first time, and she saw intelligence in his dark eyes, along with something that might have been understanding. "You all right, ma'am?" Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. Cal turned back to Burke. "I'm here for supplies and information. Heard you might know someone looking for teaching work." "Teaching?" Burke's expression shifted to confusion. "For my boys." Cal's hand came down to rest on one small head, a gesture so gentle it seemed impossible from hands that large. "They need proper schooling. Can't read, can't write. I do what I can, but—" He trailed off, the admission clearly costing him. "I'm sure there are teachers in Bitterroot," Burke began. "Already asked. Already got turned away." Cal's voice remained level. "Town folks don't want their children learning alongside half-breed boys. Made that clear enough?" Clara's breath caught. She looked at the twins again, really looked this time. They had their father's dark hair and eyes, but their skin was lighter, their features a blend of two worlds. Mixed-blood children in a territory where such mixing was legal, but rarely accepted. "I can teach them," she heard herself say. Every head in the saloon turned toward her. "What?" Burke's voice was sharp. Clara straightened her shoulders, ignoring the ache where the drunk man had grabbed her. "I said I can teach them. I'm a certified teacher from Philadelphia. If Mr. Redfeather needs someone to educate his sons, I'm qualified and available." "You work here," Burke said flatly. "I play piano here," Clara corrected, "starting at 7 o'clock in the evening. What I do during daylight hours is my own affair." She saw calculation flash across Burke's face. He knew he was losing control of the situation, knew that public intervention had shifted something fundamental. If he pushed too hard now, he'd confirm what everyone suspected about the real nature of employment at the Golden Bell. Cal looked at Clara with new interest. "You're serious?" "Completely serious. It's a long ride, 20 miles north, rough terrain. You'd need to stay at the ranch during the week, come back to town on Sundays if you wanted." "That would be acceptable," Clara said, her heart hammering. A way out. A legitimate way out, at least during daylight hours, at least for part of the week. "Can't pay much," Cal continued. $1 a week, room and board. Work's not just teaching. You'd need to help with cooking, cleaning, whatever needs doing. Ranch life's hard." "I'm not afraid of hard work." One of the twins tugged on Cal's pants. The boy whispered something Clara couldn't hear. Cal's expression softened fractionally. "My sons want to know if you're really a teacher or if you're—" He paused, clearly editing. "They're asking if you're qualified." "I taught primary school in Philadelphia for 8 years, Clara said, directing her words to the boys. "I can teach reading, writing, arithmetic, history, geography, and basic science. I'm patient. And I don't believe in harsh discipline. If you're willing to learn, I'm willing to teach." The boys looked at each other in that wordless communication unique to twins, then both nodded solemnly. Cal extended his hand.
This story was
"Caleb
posted on the
Redfeather,
channel The Rusty
these are my
Saddle.
boys,
Please
Eli
do
and
not
Jonah.
repost it in any
You can
form.
call me Cal." Clara shook his hand, noting the calluses and the strength carefully controlled. "Clara Bellamy. When can you start?" "Tomorrow, if you'll have me." "Tomorrow's fine. I'll be back at dawn to collect you. Bring whatever you need for a week." He glanced at Burke, his expression neutral, but his meaning clear. "Miss Bellamy's employment here is terminated, effective immediately." "Now wait just a minute," Burke started. "How much does she owe you?" Cal interrupted. "She owes me nothing. She works here of her own free will." "How much for the room last night and any wages earned?" Burke's jaw tightened. $5. It was highway robbery, 3 times what the room was worth, but Cal reached into his pocket without hesitation and counted out bills on the bar. "There's 5. Miss Bellamy's debt is cleared. She'll collect her things and leave with me now." "It's past midnight," Burke protested. "Surely she can wait until morning." "Now," Cal repeated quietly. The drunk man on the floor had dragged himself upright and was staggering toward the door, holding his bleeding nose. Other patrons had returned to their drinks and cards, pointedly not watching but clearly listening to every word. Clara looked at Burke and saw naked fury in his eyes, carefully controlled but absolutely present. She'd embarrassed him, cost him property he'd considered already claimed. This wouldn't be forgotten, but she'd also been given an escape she'd never expected. "I'll get my things," she said. She ran upstairs, her heart racing, and grabbed her carpet bag. The wedding dress still hung behind the door, a ghost of abandoned futures. She hesitated, then left it. Some things weren't worth carrying forward. When she came back down, Cal was waiting by the door, one twin on each side of him like silent sentinels. Burke stood behind the bar, his expression unreadable. "Miss Bellamy," Burke said as she passed, "I do hope you know what you're doing. Ranch life isn't for everyone, and Mr. Redfeather's situation is complicated. I'd hate to see you make another mistake." "My mistakes are my own to make," Clara said. She walked out into the night air, breathing deeply of wind that smelled of sage and distant rain. Cal's wagon waited in the street, a sturdy, practical thing pulled by 2 draft horses. "Boys, help Miss Bellamy up," Cal said. The twins scrambled into the wagon bed with practiced ease, then reached down small hands to help Clara climb aboard. She settled on the bench seat while Cal took the reins. As they pulled away from the Golden Bell Saloon, Clara looked back once. Burke stood in the doorway, backlit by lamplight, watching them leave. She turned forward and didn't look back again. The road north was dark and rough, the wagon jolting over rocks and ruts. The twins had curled up in the wagon bed immediately, falling asleep with the easy grace of children accustomed to long travel. Clara gripped the seat edge and tried not to think about what she'd just done. Traded one uncertain situation for another, thrown herself on the mercy of a stranger based on nothing but desperation and instinct. "You didn't have to do that," she said finally. Cal kept his eyes on the road. "Do what?" "Intervene, pay my debt, offer me employment." "Didn't like what I saw," Cal said simply. "Didn't like how that man was treating you. Didn't like how Burke was letting it happen." "You could have just stopped the assault and left." "Could have," Cal agreed. "But you said you were a teacher, and I need a teacher. Seemed like things worked out for both of us." Clara studied his profile in the moonlight. "Why didn't the town schools take your boys?" Cal was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Their mother was Lakota Sioux. Makes them half-breeds in most folks' eyes. Town's got rules about that, even if they don't say them out loud. White children learn with white teachers in white schoolhouses. Everyone else figures it out on their own. That's monstrous. That's Montana territory." Cal's voice held no bitterness, just acceptance of things he couldn't change. "Been that way since before I got here. Probably be that way long after I'm gone. Trying to fight it just means my boys suffer more. Better to find another solution." "How old are they?" 7. Lost their mother when they were 4. Fire in the barn. She was inside when it caught, trying to save the horses. Boys saw it happen. The words came flat and factual, but Clara heard the grief beneath them. "Haven't spoken more than whispers since. Doc says there's nothing wrong with their voices, just trauma. Clara glanced back at the sleeping forms in the wagon bed. I'm sorry. Me too. Cal paused. Fair warning, Miss Bellamy. Ranch life isn't easy, and the boys aren't easy either. They've got nightmares. They don't trust strangers. They might not warm up to you at all. You give it a week, and if it's not working, I'll bring you back to town, no hard feelings. But I need to know you're serious about trying. I'm serious, Clara said. Why? Cal looked at her directly. You're educated, refined. You could find teaching work somewhere that isn't a remote ranch with damaged children and a widower who barely knows how to talk to anyone except horses. Clara almost laughed. Mr. Redfeather, Cal, I have $17 to my name and no prospects. I was about to become exactly what Burke wanted me to become because I had no other options. You're offering me honest work, room and board, and a chance to do what I was trained to do. Why wouldn't I take it? Cal studied her for a long moment. Fair enough. But there's one more thing you should know. What's that? I'm not looking for a wife, not looking for anything except someone to teach my boys. Some women come out to ranches thinking frontier widowers are desperate enough to marry anyone. I'm not desperate, and I'm not interested. This is employment, nothing more. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. I just escaped an abandoned engagement and nearly got trapped into prostitution. I can assure you marriage is the absolute last thing on my mind. Something that might have been approval flickered across Cal's face. Good. Then we understand each other. They rode in silence for a while, the wagon rocking over rough ground, stars wheeling overhead in configurations Clara was still learning to recognize. The air smelled different here, cleaner somehow, despite the dust. Or maybe it just smelled like possibility. What happened with your engagement? Cal asked eventually. If you don't mind saying, Clara hesitated, then decided honesty was simpler than evasion. I was corresponding with a man named Silas Harper. He sent for me, promised marriage and security. When I arrived, I discovered he'd married someone else 4 days earlier. Silas Harper. Cal's voice hardened. Banker type? Well-dressed? Smooth-talking? You know him? Know of him. He's got a reputation for schemes that benefit himself and no one else. Sorry you got caught up in one of them. So am I, Clara said quietly. They fell silent again, but it was a more comfortable quiet now. The twins slept soundly, and the horses pulled steadily northward, and Clara felt something she hadn't felt since receiving that telegram, the faint, fragile possibility that things might work out after all. Maybe not the way she'd planned, maybe not the way she'd hoped, but maybe, somehow, they'd work out anyway. Dawn was breaking when they finally reached the ranch, a sprawling collection of buildings nestled in a valley with mountains rising blue and distant on all sides. The main house was solid and practical, built from local timber with a wide porch. Outbuildings dotted the property: barn, stable, chicken coop, storage sheds. Cal pulled the wagon to a stop and climbed down, moving to wake the boys gently. They stirred and blinked, momentarily disoriented, then saw Clara and went very still. Boys, this is Miss Bellamy. She's going to be your teacher starting today. I expect you to treat her with respect and do what she tells you, understood? Both boys nodded solemnly. Cal looked at Clara. I'll show you your room. Then I've got ranch work that can't wait. Boys can show you around, help you get settled. We eat breakfast at 7, dinner at noon, supper at 6. Anything you need to know, just ask. He led her into the house, clean but sparse, furnished with handmade furniture that showed skill but no ornamentation. Her room was small but private, with a real bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the valley. It's not much, Cal said. It's perfect, Clara replied honestly. Cal nodded and left, his boots heavy on the wooden floors. The twins stood in the doorway, watching her with identical expressions of solemn curiosity. Clara set down her carpetbag and smiled at them. Well then, shall we start with learning your letters, or would you rather show me around the ranch first? The boys looked at each other, that silent communication passing between them. Then Eli, or possibly Jonah, she couldn't tell them apart yet, stepped forward and took her hand. It was small and slightly sticky, and it felt like trust. Clara followed the twins out into the morning sunlight and thought that perhaps, just perhaps, she'd found something worth keeping after all. The ranch settled into morning rhythms with the kind of efficiency that spoke of long practice and hard necessity. Cal disappeared into the fields before the sun had fully cleared the mountains, leaving Clara alone with two 7-year-old boys who communicated primarily through glances and the occasional whispered
This
word
story was
between
posted on the
themselves.
channel The Rusty
Eli,
Saddle.
she'd learned
Please
to
do not
distinguish
repost
him
it
by
in
a
any
small
form.
scar above his left eyebrow, led her to the chicken coop first, demonstrating with careful gestures how to scatter feed and check for eggs. Jonah followed 3 steps behind, watching everything with dark eyes that seemed to catalog her every movement, judging whether she could be trusted. Clara gathered eggs into her apron, moving slowly so the boys could see she understood their silent instructions. The chickens clucked and fussed, indifferent to the complex human dynamics playing out around them. "Your father mentioned you saw your mother die," Clara said quietly, not looking at either boy directly. "That must have been terrifying." Both boys went absolutely still. Jonah's hand found Eli's, their fingers locking together with desperate tightness. Claire continued gathering eggs, her voice steady and matter-of-fact. "My mother died when I was 12. Consumption. I watched her fade for 6 months, getting thinner and paler until there was almost nothing left. The day she died, I couldn't speak for 3 weeks. My throat just closed up, like the words were stuck behind something too big to swallow around." She straightened, meeting their eyes directly. Eventually, the words came back, but I still remember what it felt like when they wouldn't come, when everything I needed to say was trapped inside with no way out. So if you can't talk or don't want to talk, that's all right with me. We'll find other ways. Eli's grip on his brother's hand loosened fractionally. Jonah's expression shifted from wariness to something that might have been cautious hope. "Now," Clara said, shifting to a brighter tone, "your father said you can't read or write yet. Is that true? Or were you just pretending so I'd underestimate you?" The ghost of a smile flickered across Eli's face. He shook his head firmly. "Can't read at all? Not even a little?" Another head shake, but this time both boys looked almost embarrassed. "Well, that's easily fixed. Reading is just matching shapes to sounds, and sounds to meanings. If you can recognize a chicken from a horse, you can recognize an A from a B. Come on, I saw a porch with good light. Let's start there." The morning passed in careful increments. Claire used a stick to draw letters in the dirt, then had the boys copy them. She started with their names, Eli and Jonah, because children always learn faster when the letters meant something personal. Eli caught on quickly, his stick movements becoming more confident with each repetition. Jonah was slower but more meticulous, erasing and redrawing until each letter matched Claire's example exactly. They worked until the sun stood directly overhead, breaking only when Clara's stomach growled loudly enough to make both boys grin. "Is it always this quiet here?" Clara asked as they walked back to the house. "Just you, your father, and the animals?" Eli nodded. Jonah pointed toward the distant mountains, then made a sweeping gesture that encompassed the valley. "You're isolated," Claire interpreted. "Closest neighbors are far away?" Another nod from Eli. Jonah held up 5 fingers, then 10, then 5 again. 20 miles? Clara guessed. Both boys nodded enthusiastically, pleased she'd understood. Inside the house, Clara found bread, cheese, and dried meat in the larder. She assembled simple sandwiches while the boys watched, then set 3 places at the rough-hewn table. They ate in companionable silence, broken only by the sounds of chewing and the occasional creak of the house settling in the heat. Through the window, Clara could see Cal in the distance, working on fence repair with the same quiet competence he brought to everything. "What does your father do when he's not ranching?" Clara asked. The boys exchanged glances. Eli made a gesture like drawing, then writing. Jonah added a motion like turning pages. "He reads? Writes?" Vigorous nodding. "What does he write?" Eli's hands moved in complex patterns Clara couldn't decipher. Finally, frustrated, he grabbed Clara's hand and pulled her toward a door she hadn't opened yet. The room beyond was clearly Cal's private space, a bedroom, but also a study of sorts. Shelves lined 2 walls, packed with books in better condition than anything else in the house. A desk sat beneath the window, its surface covered with papers, ink bottles, and pens. Clara moved closer, curiosity overcoming propriety. The papers were covered in Cal's handwriting, neat, precise, surprisingly elegant for such large hands. But it wasn't letters or accounts. It was poetry. She read a few lines, then a few more, drawn in despite herself. The poem spoke of loneliness and landscape, grief and endurance, the weight of raising children alone in a place that saw them as less than whole. The language was spare but powerful, each word chosen with the care of someone who understood that precision mattered. "Your father's a poet," Clara said softly. Eli nodded, pride evident in his expression. Jonah made a shushing gesture, pressing his finger to his lips. "It's a secret?" Both boys nodded solemnly. "Why?" Eli's hands moved again, complex gestures that might have meant shame or privacy, or simply that some things weren't meant to be shared with a world that already judged too harshly. "I won't tell anyone," Clara promised. "A man's entitled to his private thoughts, especially when he writes them this well." The boys relaxed, satisfied she understood. They led her back to the kitchen, where afternoon stretched ahead with its own demands and rhythms. Clara spent the next hours teaching verbs and nouns through action, pointing to objects, having the boys name them with gestures, then showing them the written words. Jonah proved to have a remarkable visual memory, recognizing words after seeing them only twice. Eli struggled more with retention, but made up for it with enthusiasm. They were practicing simple sentences when Cal's shadow fell across the porch. "How'd they do?" he asked, his voice carrying the roughness of hours spent not talking. "Brilliantly," Clara said honestly. Eli can write his full name now, and Jonah can recognize 20 words by sight. Give me a month, and they'll be reading basic primers. Something shifted in Cal's expression, relief, maybe, or gratitude he didn't know how to voice. "That's good. That's real good." He looked at his sons, who gazed back with identical expressions of solemn accomplishment. "You two go wash up for supper. Miss Bellamy and I need to talk." The boys scampered off, their silence punctuated by the sound of running feet and splashing water from the pump outside. Cal settled onto the porch step, gesturing for Clara to join him. She sat, maintaining careful distance, aware that they were alone in a way that would have scandalized Philadelphia society. "I want to be clear about expectations," Cal said, looking out at the valley rather than at her. "The teaching's important, but ranch work comes first. If something needs doing, cooking, cleaning, mending, helping with harvest, that takes priority. The boys can learn letters after the work's done." "I understand," Clara said. "Do you?" Cal's gaze swung toward her, direct and assessing. "Because you're city-bred, educated. This life isn't what you're used to. There's no servants, no convenience. Water comes from a well, heat comes from wood you split yourself, and when things break, you fix them or do without." "If that's going to be a problem, Mr. Redfeather," Clara interrupted quietly, "I just spent 12 hours in a saloon being treated like merchandise. Before that, I taught in Philadelphia schools where children came to class with bruises from factory work and parents who beat them for missing shifts. I've scrubbed floors, hauled water, and made one chicken feed a family of 4. I'm not afraid of work, and I'm not too proud to do what needs doing." Cal studied her for a long moment. "Fair enough, but there's something else you should know." "What's that?" "Town doesn't approve of this arrangement. Woman living alone with a man, even with children present, folks talk. Burke especially is going to spread stories, make things difficult. If you go into Bitterroot, you might face consequences." "What kind of consequences?" "Social ones. Refusal of service, cold shoulders, suggestions you're not respectable." Cal's jaw tightened. "Could be worse if Burke decides to make real trouble. He's got connections, friends who owe him favors. Man like that doesn't forget being embarrassed." Clara felt a chill despite the evening warmth. "Are you saying I'm trapped here?" "I'm saying you need to understand what you're walking into. This isn't just teaching. It's making a choice that'll mark you in certain eyes." Cal's voice softened slightly. "If you want to go back to town, find different work, I'll take you tomorrow. No judgment, no hard feelings. But if you stay, you need to know what staying means." Clara thought about the Golden Bell Saloon, about Burke's calculating smile and the drunk man's hands on her arms. She thought about the boarding houses with their closed doors and the train station where she'd stood for 3 hours in a wedding dress, waiting for a man who'd never planned to arrive. "I'm staying," she said. Cal nodded, unsurprised. "Then we'll make it work." They sat in silence as the sun sank lower, painting the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled and Cal's body tensed fractionally before relaxing again when the sound wasn't repeated. "You read my poems," he said finally. It wasn't a question. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. "The boys showed me. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have intruded. It's all right. Not much stays private in a house this small." Cal paused. "What'd you think?" Clara chose her words carefully. "I think you understand loneliness better than most people, and you're not afraid to look at it directly." That a polite way of saying they're depressing? It's an honest way of saying they're true. Clara glanced at him. "You've never tried to publish them?" Cal's laugh was short and bitter. "Who's going to publish poems by a half-breed rancher from Montana Territory? Eastern magazines want romantic drivel about noble savages or civilized frontiersmen, not actual thoughts.
This
from
story was
actual
posted
people
on the
living
channel The
actual
Rusty
lives.
Saddle.
You don't
Please
know
do
that
not
unless you
repost
try.
it in any form.
"I know enough." Cal stood, brushing dust from his pants. "Supper's in 20 minutes. Boys will be hungry." He walked away before Clara could respond, his shoulders carrying weight that had nothing to do with physical labor. The days developed their own rhythm. Clara woke before dawn, helped prepare breakfast, then spent mornings teaching while Cal worked the ranch. Afternoons involved household chores, mending clothes, preserving food, cleaning, endless cleaning because dust was a constant invader in this place where wind never fully stopped. The boys opened up gradually, like flowers responding to reliable sunlight. They still didn't speak aloud, but their gestures became more elaborate, more expressive. Jonas started leaving small gifts on Clara's pillow. Pretty rocks, interesting feathers, once a perfectly preserved bird's nest. Eli began sitting closer during lessons, sometimes leaning against her shoulder when he was tired. Cal remained distant but correct, offering help when she struggled with tasks, but never lingering, never allowing conversation to drift toward anything personal. He was unfailingly polite and completely unreachable, a man who'd built walls so high that even his own loneliness couldn't scale them. 2 weeks after Clara's arrival, the first real test came. She was in the kitchen preparing dinner when she heard shouting from outside. Cal's voice raised in anger, something she'd never heard before. She ran to the window and saw 3 men on horseback surrounding Cal, their postures aggressive. The boys materialized beside her, their faces draining of color. Jonah's hand found hers and gripped so tightly it hurt. Clara recognized one of the riders, the drunk man from the saloon, his nose still swollen and discolored from where Cal had broken it. The other 2 were strangers, but their body language spoke clearly enough. This was trouble. "Stay here," Clara told the boys firmly. "Lock the door behind me and don't open it unless I tell you to." Eli shook his head frantically, tugging on her sleeve. "I mean it. Stay inside." Clara pulled free gently and headed for the door, her heart hammering but her steps steady. Outside, the confrontation had escalated. The drunk man had dismounted and stood chest to chest with Cal, his face flushed with anger and alcohol. "You broke my nose, you red savage," he snarled. "Assaulted me in front of witnesses. I got rights." "You were assaulting a woman," Cal said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I stopped you. That's not assault. That's justice." "Justice?" The drunk man spat. "Since when does a half-breed get to decide what's justice? You're squatting on land you got no right to, raising mongrel children, and now you're keeping a white woman like property. Someone needs to teach you your place." One of the mounted men, older with a sheriff's badge pinned to his vest, cleared his throat. "Now, Tom, let's keep this civil." "Civil?" Tom rounded on the sheriff. "He broke my nose. I want him arrested." The sheriff looked uncomfortable. "Cal, you want to tell me what happened?" "Man was dragging Miss Bellamy upstairs against her will at the Golden Bell. I intervened. That's all there is to tell." "That's a lie," Tom shouted. "She's a saloon girl. She was working. He had no right to interfere with—" "I'm a school teacher," Clara said, stepping off the porch. "Not a saloon girl, and Mr. Redfeather prevented an assault. If anyone should be arrested, it's this man for attempted rape." Tom's face went purple. "You calling me a rapist?" "I'm calling you a drunk who doesn't understand the word no," Clara said, keeping her voice level despite the fear coursing through her. "Sheriff, I'll testify under oath about what happened that night. Mr. Redfeather acted to protect me from violence. There's no crime in that." The sheriff shifted in his saddle. "Miss, With all due respect, you were working at Burke's establishment. That kind of complicates your testimony. I played piano for 2 hours, Clara corrected. I was never employed as anything else, and I left that same night. If you doubt my word, I suggest you speak with Mr. Burke directly and ask him exactly what services I provided. Tom sneered. Oh, I'm sure Burke would be real happy to see you again. Maybe we should take you back to town, let him sort out what you owe him for running off like that. Cal moved so fast Clara barely saw it. One moment Tom was sneering, the next he was flat on his back in the dust with Cal's knee on his chest and a knife pressed to his throat. You don't touch her, Cal said, each word precise as a hammer blow. You don't threaten her. You don't even look at her wrong. Understand? Cal! The sheriff's voice cracked like a whip. Let him up, now! Cal held position for 3 more heartbeats, then stood in one fluid motion, the knife disappearing into his belt. Tom scrambled backward, his bravado evaporating. This ain't over, Tom wheezed. Burke's got friends in Helena, real important friends. They're going to hear about this. Let them hear, Cal said. Now get off my land. The sheriff cleared his throat. Cal, I gotta give you a warning, official-like. You keep having violent altercations, I'm going to have to do something about it. Don't matter if you're in the right. People see a man with Indian blood settling things with fists and knives. They get nervous. Then people should stop provoking me, Cal said flatly. Just saying, watch yourself. And Miss Bellamy, the sheriff turned to Clara. You might want to think about your living situation here. Town's talking and not kindly. Woman alone with a man, no marriage, no chaperone. It don't look proper, no matter how innocent it might be. Sheriff, Clara said quietly, I appreciate your concern, but I'm a grown woman making my own choices. I'm employed as a teacher and household help, nothing more. If the town chooses to assume otherwise, that's their moral failing, not mine. The sheriff sighed. Suit yourself, but don't say you weren't warned when things get complicated. He turned his horse and rode away, the other 2 men following. Tom cast one last venomous look at Cal before mounting and spurring his horse hard enough to make the animal squeal. When the dust settled, Clara and Cal stood in the yard alone, the afternoon sun beating down relentlessly. You didn't have to defend me, Cal said. Yes, I did. They were wrong, and I won't let lies stand unchallenged. Cal looked at her with something that might have been respect. You just made powerful enemies. I made those enemies the moment I refused to be what Burke wanted me to be, Clara said. At least now I'm making them while standing my ground rather than cowering in a corner. A small sound made them both turn. The boys stood in the doorway, their faces pale, Jonah's eyes wet with unshed tears. Cal's expression shifted immediately. He crossed to them in 3 long strides, kneeling to their level. It's all right. They're gone. No one's going to hurt us. Eli threw his arms around Cal's neck, burrowing into his father's shoulder. Jonah remained frozen, staring at the empty road where the men had disappeared. Clara approached slowly, crouching beside them. Jonah? What is it? The boy's mouth moved, forming shapes without sound. His hands twisted together, trembling. The fire, Cal said quietly. Men came before the fire, told me I needed to leave, said my kind wasn't welcome. I refused. 2 days later, the barn burned. His arms tightened around Eli. Could never prove they did it, but I knew. Clara felt ice slide down her spine. You think they'll try again? Don't know, but I'm not running. Cal looked at her directly. If you want to leave, now would be the time. This could get dangerous. Clara thought about Philadelphia, about the scandal that had destroyed her father and tainted everyone connected to him. She thought about the train station and the abandoned wedding dress. She thought about the Golden Bell Saloon and Nathaniel Burke's calculating smile. She'd spent her whole life being safe, being proper, being exactly what society expected. And where had it gotten her? Abandoned, broke, and desperate. I'm not leaving, she said. Cal's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes warmed fractionally. All right then. We'd better prepare for trouble. That evening, after the boys were asleep, Cal showed Clara where he kept the rifles. You know how to shoot? He asked. My father taught me basic marksmanship. He thought every person should know how to defend themselves. Smart man. Cal handed her a Winchester, checking that she knew how to load and aim properly. Keep this in your room. Anyone comes around causing trouble, you use it. Don't hesitate. Don't warn them twice. This is our land, and we got the right to defend it. Clara took the rifle, feeling its weight, its potential for violence. Do you really think they'll come back? Burke's the type who doesn't forget humiliation, and Tom's the type who nurses grudges. Add in territorial prejudice against mixed families, and yeah, I think trouble's coming. Cal moved to the window.
This story was
looking out at
posted
darkness
on the
broken
channel
only
The
by
Rusty
starlight.
Saddle.
Question
Please do
is
not
when,
repost
not
it in
if.
any form.
Then we'll be ready, Clara said. Cal glanced back at her. You're tougher than you look, Miss Bellamy. Clara. And you'd be surprised what surviving scandal teaches you about resilience. Clara, then. He tested the name, his voice making it sound different somehow. Less formal, more personal. Cal, not Mr. Red Feather. If we're going to fight together, might as well use first names. All right, Cal. Clara set the rifle carefully aside. What's our plan if they do come? They spent the next hour discussing defensive strategies, where to position themselves, how to protect the boys, what to do if the house was surrounded. It was grim planning, made worse by the knowledge that 2 children slept upstairs, innocent of the violence adults might bring to their doorstep. When Clara finally returned to her room, she lay awake for hours, the rifle propped beside her bed, listening to every creak and rustle of the house settling. Sleep came eventually, shallow and restless, broken by dreams of fire and men on horseback with torches raised high. The next 3 weeks passed in tense anticipation. Cal taught Clara and the boys fire drills, how to evacuate quickly, where to meet if the house was compromised, what to save and what to leave behind. He reinforced the barn door and cleared brush from around the buildings to eliminate hiding places. The boys absorbed it all with solemn understanding, their nightmares intensifying but their daytime courage holding firm. They practiced their letters with new intensity, as if learning had become resistance against forces that wanted to keep them ignorant and afraid. Clara found herself falling into the rhythm of ranch life more completely than she'd expected. The work was endless and exhausting, but it carried a satisfaction she'd never found in Philadelphia's drawing rooms. When she baked bread, she could eat it. When she mended clothes, she could see them worn. When she taught the boys, she could watch understanding dawn in their eyes like sunrise. And Cal, despite his reserve, became something like a partner. They developed wordless communication, a glance across the dinner table conveying warnings about the boys' moods, a gesture meaning check the perimeter, a nod of acknowledgement when difficult tasks were completed well. It wasn't friendship exactly, it was something more pragmatic and possibly more valuable, mutual respect forged through shared necessity. The attack came on a Tuesday night, 3 weeks after the confrontation with Tom. Clara woke to the smell of smoke. She was on her feet before conscious thought, grabbing the rifle and running into the hallway. Cal emerged from his room simultaneously, already dressed, already moving. "Boys!" he shouted. But Eli and Jonah were already stumbling into the hall, wide-eyed and terrified. Cal scooped them both up, one under each arm, and headed for the stairs. "Kitchen window," he told Clara. "Fire's in the barn. They'll expect us to run out the front. We go through the kitchen, head for the tree line." Clara followed, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. Behind them, orange light flickered through windows, growing brighter by the second. They made it to the kitchen just as something exploded in the yard. Probably stored oil in the barn, Clara's mind supplied distantly. The boys flinched but didn't scream, their training holding even through terror. Cal set them down long enough to force open the kitchen window. "You first," he told Clara. "Take the boys, run for the aspens. Don't stop, don't look back." "What about you?" "Someone needs to slow them down. Now go." Clara wanted to argue, but the smoke was thickening and the boys' faces were pale with remembered trauma. She climbed through the window, then reached back for Jonah, then Eli, pulling them through with strength she didn't know she possessed. "Run," she told them, and they ran. Behind them, the barn became an inferno, flames reaching toward the sky like grasping hands. Clara could hear shouting now, men's voices, harsh with excitement and violence. She pushed the boys ahead of her, praying the darkness and their small size would keep them invisible. They'd almost made the tree line when a figure stepped out from behind an aspen, blocking their path. Tom stood there with a rifle aimed directly at Clara's chest, his swollen nose making his face look monstrous in the firelight. Going somewhere? He asked and smiled. Clara's hand tightened on the rifle she still carried, but Tom saw the movement and cocked his own weapon with deliberate slowness. I wouldn't, he said, his voice carrying the thick satisfaction of a man who'd finally cornered his prey. You might get one shot off before I put a bullet through that pretty schoolteacher face. And even if you manage to hit me, my friends back there will hear it and come running. These half-breed boys won't make it 10 feet. Behind Clara, both twins had gone absolutely rigid. She could feel Jonah's hand gripping the back of her nightdress so tightly the fabric cut into her skin. Eli's breathing had gone shallow and rapid, the kind of breathing that preceded panic. What do you want? Clara asked, keeping her voice steady despite the terror flooding her system. What do I want? Tom laughed, the sound ugly in the smoke-filled darkness. I want what's owed. Burke sent me to collect his property. That's you, in case you're confused. Said you ran out on a debt, stole from him, made him look bad in front of his customers. A man like Burke, he can't let that stand. I don't owe Burke anything. Cal paid whatever debt existed. Yeah, well, Burke says different. Says you signed a contract, agreed to work for him for 6 months minimum. Says leaving after one night constitutes breach of contract, and he's within his rights to retrieve his employee. Tom's smile widened. Of course, the barn fire, that's just coincidence. Nothing to do with Burke at all. Just some concerned citizens reminding Redfeather that his kind ain't welcome here. The barn behind them groaned and collapsed in on itself, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky like dying stars. Eli made a sound, not quite a scream, but close, a strangled noise of pure terror that came from somewhere deep in his chest. Tom's attention shifted to the boy, his expression darkening. Shut that mongrel up before I do it for you. Something in Clara snapped. She'd spent her entire life being afraid of scandal, afraid of poverty, afraid of men who thought they could take whatever they wanted simply because they had the power to do so. She'd been afraid when her father's debts destroyed her future, afraid when Silas Harper abandoned her, afraid when Nathaniel Burke trapped her in that saloon. She was done being afraid. Run, she told the boys quietly. Straight into the trees. Find your father. Now. Clara. Eli's voice was barely a whisper, the first word she'd heard him speak aloud. Now, Clara barked, and the boys ran, their small forms disappearing into darkness. Tom swung his rifle toward the fleeing children, but Clara was faster. She raised her own weapon and fired, not at Tom but at the ground near his feet. The shot was deafening, and Tom jerked backward, momentarily off balance. Clara didn't wait. She turned and ran after the boys, branches whipping her face, roots threatening to trip her with every step. Behind her, Tom was shouting, cursing, and then his rifle cracked and something buzzed past her ear close enough to feel the displaced air. She dove behind a tree, her lungs burning, and tried to orient herself. Where were the boys? Where was Cal? The smoke from the burning barn had drifted into the trees now, making visibility nearly impossible. Another shot. This one, splintering bark inches from her head. Clara fired back blindly, knowing she was giving away her position but hoping to buy the boys a few more seconds to escape. The rifle's recoil slammed into her shoulder, and she heard Tom swear as he took cover. You're just making this worse, he shouted. Burke wanted you back alive, but he didn't say you had to be undamaged. Clara moved, keeping low, trying to use the smoke as cover. Her foot caught on something and she went down hard, the rifle flying from her hands. She scrambled toward it, fingers closing around the barrel just as Tom emerged from the smoke like a nightmare-given form. He kicked the rifle away and hauled Clara up by her hair, his breath hot and rancid against her face. Got you now. Clara drove her elbow into his ribs with every ounce of strength she possessed. Tom grunted and his grip loosened fractionally, enough for Clara to twist away, enough to gain 2 steps of distance. Not enough. Tom's hand closed on her arm and yanked her back, spinning her around. His fist came up and Clara saw the blow coming but couldn't avoid it. His knuckles connected with her cheekbone and the world exploded into stars and pain. She hit the ground hard, tasting blood, her vision swimming. Through the blur she saw Tom standing over her, saw him reach for his belt where a knife hung in a leather sheath. Burke said alive, Tom muttered, more to himself than to her. Didn't say nothing about unmarked. The knife came free with a whisper of steel. Then something huge and dark slammed into Tom from the side, taking him down in a tangle of limbs and violence. Clara's vision cleared enough to see Cal and Tom rolling across the forest floor, locked in a struggle that was too close and brutal for weapons. Cal was bigger, but Tom fought with the desperate viciousness of a cornered animal. They crashed into a tree, and Clara heard something crack, bone or wood, she couldn't tell. Tom's knife flashed in the firelight, filtering through smoke, and Cal jerked back, a dark stain spreading across his shirt. "No!" Clara screamed, the word tearing
This story
from her
was
throat.
posted on the channel
Cal's
The
hand
Rusty
shot out
Saddle.
and caught Tom's
Please do not
wrist,
repost it in
squeezing
any
until
form.
the knife fell. Then Cal's fist connected with Tom's jaw once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. Tom went limp, and Cal shoved him away like discarded trash. Cal staggered upright, one hand pressed to his side where blood seeped between his fingers. His face was battered, one eye already swelling shut, but his expression was pure controlled fury. "Where are the boys?" he demanded. "They ran. I told them to find you." Clara struggled to her feet, her own face throbbing where Tom had hit her. "You're bleeding. I've had worse. We need to—" Gunfire erupted from the direction of the ranch house. Multiple weapons, the sound echoing through the trees. Cal's expression shifted to something close to panic. "They're not all here," he said. "Some stayed at the house. If the boys went back—" They ran. Clara's lungs screamed and her legs felt like lead, but she pushed harder, following Cal through smoke and darkness toward the sound of violence. Branches tore at her nightdress and scratched her arms bloody, but she didn't slow down. They burst from the tree line to find the ranch yard transformed into a war zone. The barn was gone, reduced to a skeleton of glowing timbers. The house was still standing, but surrounded by 4 men on horseback, all armed. And there, pressed against the porch with nowhere to run, were Eli and Jonah. One of the men had dismounted and was advancing on the boys, his rifle raised. "Come on now, you little mongrels. Your daddy's dead in the woods, and the school teacher ain't far behind. You can come quiet, or we can do this the hard way." "They're children," Clara shouted, stepping into the open. Every eye turned toward her. "Whatever grievance you have, it's with adults. Leave them alone." The mounted men exchanged glances. One of them, older than the others, with a prosperous look despite the violence, nudged his horse forward. "You must be the Philadelphia school teacher. Nathaniel Burke sends his regards." "Burke's not here," Clara said. "He sent you to do his dirty work because he's too cowardly to face us himself." The man smiled. "Burke's a businessman. He don't get his hands dirty when he's got employees to handle unpleasantness. Now, you can come along peaceful-like, and we'll forget about tonight's misunderstanding, or we can tie you to a horse and drag you back. Your choice." Cal moved to stand beside Clara, his presence solid despite his injury. Blood still seeped from his side, but he held himself upright through sheer will. "Nobody's taking anyone anywhere." "Cal Redfeather, heard you were dead." The man's tone was conversational, but his hand rested on the revolver at his hip. "Seems reports were premature, though that can be corrected. You'll have to go through me first." "That can be arranged." The man's smile never wavered. "See, here's the situation. Burke wants the woman. My associates here want revenge for what you did to Tom, and certain interested parties in Helena would prefer if you and your half-breed children just disappeared. Makes everything simpler. So we can do this quick. Bullet to the head for you, boys to the orphanage, woman back where she belongs. Or we can do this slow. Up to you." Clara felt rage burn through fear. "The boys stay with their father. That's not negotiable." "You're not exactly in a position to negotiate, sweetheart." "Actually," a new voice cut through the tension, "I think she is." Everyone turned. A wagon had pulled into the yard so quietly that no one had noticed, and from it descended a woman Clara had never seen before, middle-aged, expensively dressed in traveling clothes, her bearing suggesting wealth and authority. The mounted men shifted uneasily. One of them lowered his rifle. "Mrs. Harper, didn't expect to see you here." Mrs. Harper. Clara's mind spun. Harper, was this? "Emily Harper," the woman confirmed as if reading Clara's thoughts. "Silas Harper's sister. And I believe you gentlemen are trespassing on property that's under legal protection." The older man's smile faltered. "Ma'am, with all respect, this is none of your concern." "On the contrary, it's very much my concern." Emily Harper moved forward with the confidence of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I've just come from Helena, where I filed formal complaints with the territorial marshal regarding my brother's mail fraud scheme and Nathaniel Burke's attempted forced servitude of Miss Bellamy. The marshal was quite interested to learn about the systematic targeting of vulnerable women through false marriage promises and subsequent entrapment in saloon employment. She produced a folded document from her coat. This is a cease and desist order. Any further harassment of Miss Bellamy, Mr. Redfeather, or his children will result in immediate arrest and prosecution. The barn fire currently destroying this property will be investigated as arson. And if anything happens to any of the people on this ranch tonight, every man here will be charged as an accessory to attempted murder. The silence that followed was absolute. The older man cleared his throat. You can't prove we had anything to do with that fire. Can I? Funny thing about territorial marshals, they tend to believe wealthy widows with political connections over hired thugs working for a saloon owner with a history of complaints. Emily's smile was razor sharp. Now, I suggest you gentlemen mount up and leave before this situation deteriorates further. And you can tell Mr. Burke that his business practices are now under official scrutiny. If he's smart, he'll close up shop and move somewhere his reputation hasn't preceded him. The men exchanged uncertain glances. Their confidence had evaporated in the face of legal threats and social standing they couldn't intimidate. This ain't over, the older man said, but his voice lacked conviction. Actually, it is. Emily's tone left no room for argument. Unless you'd like to explain to a territorial judge why you were burning buildings and threatening children in the middle of the night? The men retreated, mounting their horses with considerably less swagger than they'd shown earlier. Within minutes, the sound of hoofbeats faded into the distance, leaving only the crackle of dying embers and the ragged breathing of people who'd survived violence by the thinnest margin. Clara's legs gave out. She sat down hard in the dirt, her entire body shaking with delayed reaction. Cal swayed but remained standing, his hand still pressed to his bleeding side. The boys ran to him, both talking now, actual words tumbling over each other in whispered urgency. "Papa, you're hurt. We were so scared. We thought you were dead." Cal sank to his knees, gathering both sons against his chest, despite the pain it must have caused. "I'm all right. We're all right." Emily Harper approached Clara with concern, softening her aristocratic features. "Are you injured, my dear?" Clara touched her swelling cheekbone and winced. "Nothing serious." "But I don't understand. Why are you here? How did you know?" "It's a rather long story." Emily helped Clara to her feet with surprising strength. "The short version is that I discovered my brother's scheme quite by accident when I came across his correspondence file. He'd been contacting multiple women simultaneously, making promises he never intended to keep, and in some cases collecting travel reimbursement fees that funded his actual marriage to a banker's daughter. She looked genuinely pained. I was horrified. Silas has always been ambitious and morally flexible, but this was beyond the pale. I began tracing what happened to the women he'd contacted and discovered several had ended up in unfortunate circumstances. When I learned you'd been stranded at Bitterroot Station, I came as quickly as I could. But how did you know about Burke, about tonight? I made inquiries at the Golden Bell Saloon. Mr. Burke was quite forthcoming once I mentioned my family's legal connections and suggested that his establishment might face investigation for human trafficking. Emily's expression hardened. He admitted sending men to retrieve stolen property, thinking I might be sympathetic to his property concerns. Instead, I went straight to the marshal. Cal had managed to stand again, though his face was pale beneath the bruises. "We owe you our lives, Mrs. Harper." "You owe me nothing. My brother created this situation through his dishonesty. The least I can do is try to mitigate the damage." Emily looked around at the destroyed barn, the traumatized children, the blood-stained adults. "Though I'm afraid the immediate crisis is resolved, you still have significant problems. Your barn is gone, your reputation in town is compromised, and Burke will certainly attempt retaliation despite legal warnings." "We'll manage," Cal said quietly. "I'm sure you will, but you shouldn't have to manage alone." Emily pulled another document from her coat. "This is a formal statement for my brother admitting his fraud scheme. I convinced him, quite forcefully, to put it in writing. With this, Miss Bellamy can pursue legal action for breach of contract and fraud. More importantly, it establishes her as a victim rather than an opportunist, which should help with her social standing." Clara took the paper with trembling hands. Why are you doing this? Because I watched my brother destroy my late husband's business through unethical practices, and I stood by and did nothing. I won't make that mistake again. Emily's voice was firm. You deserve better than what you've received, Miss Bellamy. All of you do. She turned to Cal. You need medical attention for that wound, Mr. Redfeather. I passed a doctor's office in town. I can take you there now, or we can summon him here. No town, Cal said immediately. But if you could bring him here in the morning,
This story
I'd
was
appreciate
posted
it.
on the channel The Rusty
Emily nodded,
Saddle.
understanding.
Please do not repost
Of
it in
course.
any form.
I'll arrange it. She glanced at the sky, where dawn was beginning to lighten the eastern horizon. I'll stay at the hotel tonight and return first thing. Is there anything else you need immediately? Information, Clara said, about the legal situation. If Burke has friends in Helena like his men claimed, can this really stop him? Emily's smile turned calculating. Burke's friends are mostly business associates who benefit from his saloon's profitability. Once they learn he's under investigation for forced servitude and has been burning ranches to intimidate witnesses, their loyalty will evaporate quite rapidly. Money talks, Miss Bellamy, and nobody wants to be associated with a scandal that might affect their own interests. She moved toward her wagon, then paused. One more thing. The boarding house, Mrs. Henley's establishment, refused you accommodation, correct? Clara nodded, confused by the change of subject. I own that building. Mrs. Henley manages it, but doesn't own it. I'll be having words with her about discriminatory practices and Christian charity. Emily's tone suggested those words would be pointed. Not that it matters now, but it's the principle of the thing. She climbed into her wagon with practiced ease. I'll return before noon with the doctor and whatever supplies you need to begin barn reconstruction. Try to rest if you can. The wagon pulled away, leaving the four of them standing in the wreckage of the night. Cal swayed again, more pronounced this time. Clara grabbed his arm to steady him. You need to sit down before you fall down. Boys need, Cal started. The boys need their father conscious and alive, Clara interrupted. Inside, now, before you bleed out in front of your children. Something in her tone penetrated Cal's stubborn independence. He allowed her to guide him toward the house, the twins trailing behind like worried shadows. Inside, Clara lit lamps and cleared the kitchen table with shaking hands. Eli, Jonah, I need clean cloths, hot water from the reservoir, and the medical kit your father keeps in the pantry. Can you do that? Both boys nodded and scattered to their tasks, grateful for something concrete to do. Clara helped Cal onto the table, ignoring his protests. Let me see the wound. Cal lifted his shirt, revealing a knife slash across his ribs, long but not deep, bleeding steadily but not spurting. Clara's hands moved with surprising steadiness as she examined the injury, her teaching experience with childhood accidents translating unexpectedly well to this crisis. It needs stitches, she said. I can do it myself. You can barely stay upright. I'll do it. Clara's voice left no room for argument. I've sewn enough samplers and mended enough clothes to manage a straight line. Unless you have a better option? Cal met her eyes and saw the determination there. No better option. The boys returned with supplies, their faces solemn. Clara washed her hands thoroughly, then threaded a needle with gut string from the medical kit. Her hands trembled only slightly as she began the first stitch. Cal's jaw clenched, but he made no sound, even when the needle pierced skin. Eli held his father's hand, white-knuckled
This story
and
was
silent.
posted on the channel The
Jonah
Rusty
stood
Saddle.
watch at the window,
Please do not
his small
repost it
body
in any
rigid
form.
with the responsibility of guarding his injured family. Clara worked methodically, each stitch as neat as she could manage under the circumstances. The intimacy of the moment wasn't lost on her. Her hands on Cal's bare skin, close enough to see the scars that mapped a life of hard labor and harder losses. She could feel his warmth, smell the copper of his blood mixed with smoke and sweat. Thank you, Cal said quietly, for protecting my boys, for fighting when you could have surrendered. I wasn't going to let them take the children, Clara said, concentrating on her stitching. And I wasn't going back to Burke. Not alive, anyway. Cal's good eye studied her face. The swelling from Tom's blow, the scratches from running through trees, the set of her jaw that spoke of determination born from desperation. You're braver than you think. I'm terrified, Clara admitted. I'm just tired of letting fear control my choices. She finished the last stitch and tied it off, then cleaned the wound and bound it with strips of clean cloth. Cal sat up slowly, testing the repair. "It'll hold," Clara said, "but you need rest and no strenuous activity for at least a week. Ranch doesn't stop for injuries." "Then the ranch will have to learn," Clara said firmly. "Eli, Jonah, your father's going to bed. You two as well. We'll deal with everything else after we've slept." The boys looked to Cal for confirmation. He nodded, too exhausted to argue further. They made their way upstairs in a slow procession. Clara helped Cal to his room, made sure he was settled, then checked on the boys. They'd climbed into the same bed, curled together like puppies seeking comfort. "Miss Clara?" Eli whispered. "Are the bad men coming back?" Clara sat on the edge of their bed. "I don't think so. Mrs. Harper scared them pretty badly with all those legal threats." "But what if she's wrong?" Jonah's voice was barely audible. "What if they come back and burn the house like they burned the barn? What if—" Clara gathered both boys against her, feeling them shake with suppressed sobs. "Then we'll fight again, and we'll keep fighting until they understand we're not going anywhere. You're safe here. This is your home, and nobody gets to take that away from you." "Promise?" Eli asked. Clara thought about the promises she'd been given, her father's promises of security, Silas Harper's promises of marriage, Nathaniel Burke's promises of respectable employment. All lies, all betrayals. But these boys deserve better than more empty words. "I promise," she said. "I won't let anyone hurt you." She stayed with them until their breathing evened out in sleep, then returned to her own room. The rifle still leaned against her bed where she'd left it. Dawn light was filtering through the window, painting everything in shades of gold and gray. Clara sat on the edge of her bed and finally allowed herself to feel everything she'd suppressed during the crisis. The terror of facing Tom in the woods, the helplessness of watching Cal bleed, the rage at Burke and his hired thugs, the desperate hope that Emily Harper's intervention might actually change something. Her hands shook, her face throbbed, her body ached from running and fighting and surviving. But she'd survived. They'd all survived. Clara looked out at the valley as morning claimed the sky, at the blackened remains of the barn and the house that still stood despite everything. She thought about going back to Philadelphia, about trying to reclaim the life she'd lost. The thought lasted exactly 3 seconds before she dismissed it. Philadelphia had nothing for her. That life was ash and memory, no more substantial than the smoke still drifting from the barn's ruins. This place, this rough, dangerous, beautiful place, had given her something Philadelphia never had. It had given her purpose. It had given her people who needed her, who trusted her, who'd fought beside her. It had given her a reason to stop being afraid. Clara lay back on her bed and closed her eyes, letting exhaustion claim her at last. Her last conscious thought was that when she woke, there would be work to do. A barn to rebuild, children to teach, a man to nurse back to health, and a future to forge from the wreckage of the past. But for now, rest. For now, survival was enough. Clara woke to the sound of voices downstairs and sunlight streaming through her window at an angle that suggested late morning. She'd slept for hours, her body claiming rest with the desperation of someone who'd pushed far beyond normal limits. Every muscle ached as she sat up, and her face throbbed where Tom's fist had connected. But she was alive and whole, and that was more than she'd had any right to expect 12 hours ago. She dressed quickly in her plainest work dress and descended the stairs to find Emily Harper had returned as promised, accompanied by a silver-haired man carrying a medical bag. The boys sat at the kitchen table eating bread and jam, their eyes tracking the strangers with wary attention. "Miss Bellamy," Emily said warmly, "Dr. Morrison has just finished examining Mr. Redfeather. The stitching you did was quite competent, apparently." The doctor nodded, his weathered face kind. "Clean work, especially under the circumstances. The wound's already beginning to close properly. I've left instructions for care and some laudanum if the pain becomes unmanageable." He glanced at Clara's bruised face. "You should let me look at that cheekbone." "It's fine," Clara said automatically. "It's swollen and discolored, which means it's not fine." Dr. Morrison gestured to a chair. "Sit. This won't take long." His examination was gentle but thorough, his fingers probing the injury with practiced efficiency. "No fracture, fortunately, You'll have impressive bruising for a week or so, but it should heal without complications. Apply cold compresses today, then warm ones tomorrow. And try to avoid any more fistfights with drunken ranch hands. Despite everything, Clara felt herself smile. I'll do my best. Emily waited until the doctor had repacked his bag before speaking again. I've brought supplies as promised, lumber for barn reconstruction, food staples, and some items I thought you might need. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I've also brought news from town.
This story
Cal
was
appeared in the
posted on the
doorway,
channel The Rusty
moving
Saddle.
stiffly but
Please
under
do
his
not
own
repost
power.
it in any
His
form.
torso was freshly bandaged and his face looked less gray than it had in the pre-dawn darkness. What kind of news? The complicated kind. Emily's expression turned grim. Burke closed the Golden Bell this morning and left town on the eastbound train. However, before leaving, he filed a formal complaint with the territorial court claiming Miss Bellamy breached an employment contract and owes him 6 months' wages plus damages. Clara felt her stomach drop. But I never signed anything. Burke claims you did. He's produced a document bearing what he alleges is your signature. Emily held up a hand before Clara could protest. I've seen it. The signature is clearly forged. The handwriting doesn't match the samples I obtained from the station master's guest registry. But that doesn't mean the court will dismiss it immediately. Burke's betting that you won't have the resources to fight a prolonged legal battle, and that you'll simply surrender to avoid the cost and scandal. How much is he claiming? Cal asked, his voice dangerously quiet. $500. The number hung in the air like an executioner's blade. $500 was more money than most frontier families saw in 2 years. It was impossible, absurd, and legally enforceable if Burke's forgery held up in court. I don't have that kind of money, Clara said numbly. I don't have any money. Which is precisely what Burke's counting on. Emily's jaw set with determination. However, he's made a critical miscalculation. I have money, and I have no compunction about using it to destroy men who exploit vulnerable women. I've already retained a lawyer in Helena, one of the best in the territory. He's reviewing the case now. Cal shook his head. Mrs. Harper, we can't ask you to... You're not asking. I'm offering. Emily's tone brooked no argument. My brother created this situation. Burke exploited it. Both of them targeted Miss Bellamy because they thought she was alone and defenseless. They were wrong, and I intend to make that abundantly clear. She pulled out a chair and sat at the table with the boys, her elegant traveling dress incongruous in the rough kitchen. There's more. The territorial marshal is investigating the barn fire, and several townspeople have come forward with information about Burke's business practices. It seems once people felt safe enough to talk, they had quite a lot to say about forced servitude, exploitation of desperate women, and payments to local officials to ignore complaints. The sheriff, Clara said, remembering the uncomfortable man on horseback who'd warned them about appearances. Among others, the marshal is quite interested in the relationship between Burke and certain law enforcement officials. Emily's smile was sharp. Montana Territory is trying to achieve statehood. Federal authorities are watching carefully, and corruption scandals don't play well in Washington. Burke may have fled, but he's left behind a considerable mess that powerful people want cleaned up quickly. Dr. Morrison cleared his throat. I should mention that I've documented Miss Bellamy's injuries for the official record, along with Mr. Redfeather's knife wound. If criminal charges are filed regarding last night's events, you'll have medical evidence to support your testimony. Thank you, Cal said quietly. The doctor nodded and headed for the door, then paused.
This story
For what
was
it's
posted
worth,
on the channel
I've
The
lived in
Rusty
Bitterroot
Saddle.
for 20
Please do
years.
not
I've
repost
watched
it
good
in any
people
form.
get driven out by prejudice and powerful men who thought they owned this territory. It's about time someone fought back. After he left, silence settled over the kitchen. The boys had stopped eating, their attention fixed on the adults with the solemn understanding of children who'd learned too young that the world wasn't safe or fair. Emily studied them for a moment, then shifted her focus to Clara. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Do you want to stay here, or would you prefer to return east? I can arrange transportation and help you establish yourself in a new city where Burke's reach doesn't extend. You'd be free to start fresh with enough resources to be comfortable while you find employment. Clara looked around the kitchen, at the rough-hewn table Cal had built himself, at the boys who'd learned to trust her enough to speak, at the man standing in the doorway with bandages wrapped around ribs she'd stitched closed with her own hands. Through the window, she could see the charred remains of the barn and the mountains rising beyond, indifferent to human drama. "I'm staying," she said, "even knowing the legal battle ahead, even knowing the town's opinion is likely to remain hostile." Even knowing all of that, Clara's voice was steady. "I'm tired of running from difficult situations. I'm tired of letting other people's prejudices and lies dictate my choices. This is where I want to be." Emily's expression softened. "Then we fight. But you should know what you're up against. Burke's lawsuit is just the beginning. There are also questions about your living arrangement here." Cal's jaw tightened. "What kind of questions?" "The kind that small-minded people ask about unmarried women living with unmarried men." Emily's tone was delicate. "The territorial court takes a dim view of situations that appear improper, even when they're entirely innocent. If Burke's lawyers argue that you're living in a compromised situation, it could affect the case." "That's ridiculous," Clara protested. "I'm employed as a teacher and housekeeper. There's nothing improper about it." "You and I know that, but perception matters in legal proceedings, especially when the defendant is trying to paint you as a woman of loose morals who breached a contract." Emily folded her hands on the table. "I'm not suggesting anything untoward is happening. I'm simply warning you that Burke will use every possible angle to discredit your character." Cal moved into the room properly, pulling out a chair and sitting with visible discomfort. "So what do we do?" "We have several options." Emily counted them off on her fingers. "First, we can fight the perception directly by having multiple witnesses testify to the propriety of the arrangement. Dr. Morrison would likely be willing, as would I. Second, we can argue that frontier necessity makes different rules, that isolated ranches require practical solutions that might not conform to Eastern social conventions. Third," she paused, clearly uncomfortable with what came next. "Third?" Clara prompted. "Third, you could marry. It would eliminate any question of impropriety and provide legal protection that would make Burke's case significantly harder to argue." The suggestion landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples of shock through the room. Eli and Jonah looked at each other with wide eyes. Cal's expression went carefully blank. Clara felt heat flood her cheeks. We're not, Clara stammered. "I'm not suggesting a love match," Emily said quickly. "Simply a legal arrangement that would protect both of you. Marriage would give Miss Bellamy legal standing as Mrs. Redfeather, which carries protections that hired help doesn't. It would legitimize her presence here and make it much harder for Burke to claim she's a woman of questionable character." "No," Cal's voice was flat and final. "I told Clara from the beginning this was employment, nothing more. I won't trap her into marriage to solve a legal problem." "It wouldn't be a trap if both parties agreed," Emily started. "No," Cal repeated. "We'll find another way." Clara should have felt relieved. She should have been grateful that Cal wasn't trying to pressure her into a marriage of convenience. But instead, she felt a strange twist of something that might have been disappointment. She pushed the feeling aside firmly. "Cal's right. Marriage shouldn't be a legal strategy. We'll fight this properly, through the courts, with the truth." Emily studied them both for a long moment, then nodded. "Very well. Then we proceed with options 1 and 2. I'll have my lawyer draw up statements for witnesses to sign. We'll need detailed accounts of the arrangement, how you came to be employed here, what your duties consist of, character references if you have them." "I can provide references from Philadelphia," Clara said. "The headmistress at the school where I taught, several families I worked with." "Excellent. Get me names and addresses, and I'll have my lawyer contact them." Emily glanced at Cal. "And you'll need to document your search for a teacher, the refusals from the town school, the reasons you required live-in help. The more evidence we have that this arrangement was based on practical necessity rather than improper intentions, the better." Cal nodded, though his expression remained guarded. Emily rose, gathering her things. "I'll return to Helena tomorrow and meet with the lawyer. The case won't go to trial for at least 6 weeks. Territorial courts move slowly. In the meantime, I'd suggest you continue exactly as you have been. Teach the boys, maintain the household, rebuild the barn. Live your lives as if Burke's accusations don't exist, because the best defense against lies is simply living the truth." She moved toward the door, then turned back. "One more thing. There's a woman in town, Mrs. Sarah Chen runs the dry goods store. She came to me this morning and asked me to give you this." Emily held out a sealed envelope. Clara took it, confused, and opened it to find a brief note in elegant handwriting. "Miss Bellamy, I heard what happened at the ranch. I'm sorry for how you were treated when you first arrived in Bitterroot. If you need anything, supplies, testimony, friendship, please ask. Some of us know the difference between scandal and courage. Sarah Chen." Clara felt unexpected tears prick her eyes. "I don't understand. She doesn't even know me." "She knows what it's like to be an outsider in this town," Emily said gently. "She's Chinese, married to a white shopkeeper who died 2 years ago. She's faced her own share of prejudice and exclusion. Sometimes the people who've suffered most are the quickest to offer help." After Emily left, Clara stood holding the note, reading it again and again as if the words might change or disappear. Kindness from an unexpected source felt almost more overwhelming than the violence of the night before. "Miss Clara?" Jonah's voice was soft. "Are you crying?" Clara wiped her eyes quickly. "Just dust. And relief, I suppose. It's been a complicated few days."
This story was posted on the
Eli
channel
slipped
The
his
Rusty
hand into
Saddle.
hers.
Please do not
"Are you going to
repost it
leave?
in any form.
Because of the bad men and the court and everything?" Clara knelt down to the boys' level, meeting their worried gazes directly. "No, I already told Mrs. Harper I'm staying. This is my home now, too, if you'll let it be." "Of course we'll let it be," Jonah said, as if the answer was obvious. "You're our teacher. You're our friend. You fought the bad men to protect us." "You stitched Papa's side when he was bleeding," Eli added. "That makes you family." The simplicity of their logic, the absolute certainty in their voices, made Clara's throat tight. "Well then, family doesn't abandon each other when things get difficult. So we'll face whatever comes together." Cal cleared his throat from where he still sat at the table. "Boys, why don't you go check on the horses? Make sure they've got water and feed." The twins exchanged knowing glances but obeyed, scampering out the door with the resilience of children who'd learned to bounce back from trauma. When they were alone, Cal spoke without looking at Clara. "You don't have to stay. Emily's offer was genuine. She'd help you start over somewhere safe." "I know. This fight with Burke could get ugly. Court cases drag on for months, sometimes years. Your reputation will be torn apart publicly. People will say terrible things." "I know that too." Cal finally met her eyes. "Then why stay?" Clara moved to the window, looking out at the valleys she'd come to know over the past weeks. "Because for the first time since my father's scandal destroyed everything, I'm doing work that matters. I'm teaching children who genuinely want to learn. I'm living honestly instead of hiding behind social conventions that never protected me anyway." She turned back to face him. "And because running away didn't work the first time, maybe it's time to try standing my ground." Something shifted in Cal's expression, respect maybe, or recognition of shared stubbornness. Emily was right about one thing. This is going to be hard. "Nothing worth doing is easy," Clara said. "You taught me that, whether you meant to or not." They held each other's gaze for a moment that stretched longer than it should have, weighted with things neither of them knew how to articulate. Then Cal looked away, breaking the spell. "Barn won't rebuild itself," he said gruffly. "And I've got cattle to check on, even if I'm supposed to be resting." "You're supposed to be resting," Clara confirmed. "Doctor's orders, which means I'll check on the cattle while you supervise the boys with their reading lessons." Cal started to protest, then seemed to recognize the futility. "You know how to check cattle? I'm a quick learner, and you're still bleeding through your bandages, so unless you
This
want me to
story
stitch
was
you up
posted
again,
on the channel
less
The
carefully
Rusty
this time,
Saddle.
you'll
Please
stay
do not
here and
repost
rest."
it in any form.
A ghost of a smile touched Cal's lips. "You're getting bossy." "I'm getting practical. There's a difference." Clara headed for the door, then paused. "Thank you, by the way." "For what?" "For not pressuring me about Emily's suggestion. For making it clear that marriage isn't an obligation or expectation." Clara's voice softened. "A lot of men wouldn't have done that." Cal's expression was unreadable. "I meant what I said at the beginning. This is employment, nothing more. You're free to leave whenever you want, and you're free from any obligations beyond the work we agreed to." It was exactly what Clara had wanted to hear. So why did it feel vaguely like disappointment? She pushed the thought aside and went to tend the cattle, leaving Cal alone with his wounds and whatever thoughts occupied a man who wrote poetry about loneliness but refused to acknowledge his own needs. The next 6 weeks passed in a blur of activity and anxiety. Emily's lawyer filed formal responses to Burke's lawsuit, challenging the forged signature and demanding proof of any actual employment agreement. Meanwhile, the territorial marshal's investigation into the barn fire led to arrests of 2 of Burke's associates, though Burke himself remained safely ensconced in Denver, beyond Montana's immediate legal reach. Clara fell into the rhythm of ranch life more completely than she'd thought possible. She learned to milk cows, chop wood, mend fences, and a dozen other skills that would have horrified her Philadelphia acquaintances. Her hands grew calloused and strong, her skin tanned despite her best efforts at sun protection. Her body adapted to physical labor until tasks that had left her exhausted in the first week became routine. The boys thrived under structured education. Eli proved to have a gift for mathematics, solving problems in his head faster than Clara could write them down. Jonah discovered a love of stories, devouring every book Cal owned and begging for more. Their voices grew stronger as their confidence increased, though they still sometimes retreated into silence when overwhelmed. And Cal remained a puzzle Clara couldn't quite solve. He was unfailingly courteous, occasionally almost friendly, but always maintaining careful distance. He never touched her unnecessarily, never let conversations drift toward anything personal, never acknowledged the growing awareness that hummed between them like electricity before a storm. It drove Clara slightly mad, though she'd never admit it. She tried to convince herself she was relieved by his distance. After all, she'd fled one disastrous marriage arrangement already. She had no business thinking about another, especially not with a man who'd made his disinterest crystal clear. But late at night, when she lay awake listening to the house settle, she sometimes found herself thinking about the way Cal's hands moved when he worked with wood, or the rare smile that transformed his severe face, or the gentleness he showed his sons despite his own gruff exterior. She thought about the poetry he wrote and never shared, the loneliness he carried like a physical burden, the walls he'd built that seemed designed to keep everyone at exactly the same distance. And she wondered what it might take to breach those walls, and whether she even had the right to try. Sarah Chen became an unexpected ally. The shopkeeper proved to be sharp-minded and deeply informed about Bitterroot's social dynamics. She visited the ranch twice, bringing supplies and gossip in equal measure. Burke's lawsuit is the talk of the town, she reported during her second visit, settling at the kitchen table with tea Clara had learned to brew properly. Opinions divided. Some folks think you're a scarlet woman trying to trap poor Cal into marriage. Others think Burke's a scoundrel who got what he deserved. A few people actually believe you're just a teacher trying to do her job. Which group is larger? Clara asked. Sarah's expression turned wry. The first one, unfortunately. Small towns love scandal, and a beautiful woman living alone with a handsome widower makes for excellent gossip. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks at the word beautiful, but pushed past it. What about the legal case? Do people think Burke will win? Hard to say. Emily Harper's reputation carries weight, and her lawyer is formidable. But Burke's lawyer is arguing that you're a woman of low character who seduced Cal into harboring you illegally. Sarah sipped her tea. They're planning to call witnesses who will testify about seeing you enter the Golden Bell voluntarily, about you playing piano there, about you going upstairs to Burke's private rooms. All of which is true, Clara said quietly, except the implication that I was doing anything other than seeking employment and shelter. Truth matters less than perception in these cases. Sarah's voice was gentle but firm. I've seen it before. They'll paint you as a fallen woman, and once that label sticks, it's nearly impossible to remove. Clara set down her teacup with deliberate care. Then we'll have to make sure it doesn't stick. How? By being exactly who I am, publicly and without apology. By teaching the boys and maintaining this household and showing through action that I'm exactly what I claim to be, a teacher and employee, nothing more. Sarah studied her for a long moment. Is that really all you are? Just a teacher and employee? The question hung between them, heavy with implication. Clara found she couldn't answer immediately, couldn't voice thoughts she barely acknowledged even to herself. That's all the court needs to know, she said finally. Sarah's smile was knowing but kind. If you say so. The summons arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a nervous courier who refused to meet Clara's eyes. The territorial court had set a trial date for 2 weeks hence in Helena. Clara was required to appear and provide testimony regarding her relationship with Nathaniel Burke and her current living arrangements. Cal read the summons over her shoulder, his expression darkening. They're going to make you testify about the saloon. I know. They're going to ask invasive questions, try to make you admit to things that never happened. I know that too. Clara refolded the summons carefully. But I can't fight this if I don't show up. You could leave, Cal said quietly. Emily offered to help you start over. You could be gone before the trial date, beyond Burke's reach. Clara turned to face him directly. Is that what you want? For me to leave? Cal's jaw worked, his dark eyes unreadable. I want you to be safe. I want you to have a future that isn't destroyed by my problems and Burke's vengeance. These are my problems too now, Clara said. Burke targeted me long before I ever came to this ranch, and I'm tired of running from problems. I'm staying and I'm fighting, and whatever happens in that courtroom, at least I'll face it with my head up and my truth intact. Something flickered across Cal's face. Pride, maybe? Or resignation? Or something else Clara couldn't identify. Then I'm coming with you to Helena. You don't have to. Yes, I do. You'll need someone to testify about the employment arrangement, about what happened at the Golden Bell, and... He paused, seeming to wrestle with words that didn't come easily. And you shouldn't have to face this alone. The boys, who'd been listening from the doorway with worried expressions, rushed forward. We're coming too, Eli announced. Absolutely not, Cal said immediately. This is court business, not suitable for children. But we can testify, Jonah protested. We can tell them Miss Clara is a good teacher, that she takes care of us, that she's not bad like Mr. Burke says. Cal's expression softened, but his voice remained firm. I know you want to help, but courtrooms aren't safe places for children, especially when the questions get ugly. You'll stay with Sarah Chen while we're gone. Both boys started to argue, but Clara cut them off gently. Your father's right. This is adult business, and it might involve testimony about things you shouldn't hear, but you can help by being on your best behavior while we're away, and by continuing your studies so we can see how much you've learned when we get back. The boys subsided, unhappy but obedient. That night, Clara packed her few belongings with trembling hands. In 2 weeks, she'd stand in a courtroom and have her character dissected by strangers, have her every choice questioned and her motives examined. She'd be forced to defend decisions made in desperation, to explain why a respectable schoolteacher had walked into a saloon and then fled to live with a man she barely knew. The truth, that she'd been abandoned, desperate, and terrified, would sound like excuse-making. The reality, that Cal had offered safety when no one else would, might be twisted into something sordid and transactional. And Burke, safe in Denver, would watch his lawyers destroy her reputation without ever having to face the consequences of his own actions. Clara looked out her window at the valley spread below, at the partially rebuilt barn and the mountains beyond. She thought about leaving, about accepting Emily's offer and disappearing into anonymity somewhere Burke's reach didn't extend. The thought lasted exactly as long as it took to hear the boys' voices drifting up from downstairs, reading aloud to each other in the halting but determined way of new learners. She wasn't running, not anymore. Whatever waited in Helena, she'd face it standing upright. The journey to Helena took 2 days by wagon, and every mile felt like traveling toward judgment. Clara sat beside Cal on the bench seat, watching the landscape shift from familiar valley to unfamiliar territory.
This story was posted
Her
on the
stomach
channel
twisted
The
with
Rusty
anxiety
Saddle.
that
Please do not
intensified as they drew
repost it in
closer
any
to the
form.
territorial capital. They'd left the boys with Sarah Chen, who'd promised to keep them safe and occupied with lessons and store chores. The twins had clung to Clara when saying goodbye, whispering promises to be good and begging her to come back soon. The trust in their eyes had nearly broken her resolve, but it also strengthened it. She was fighting for them as much as herself now. Cal drove in his usual silence, but it felt different somehow, not distant but companionable, as if he understood that words would only make the anxiety worse. Occasionally his hand would brush hers when adjusting the reins, and Clara found herself noticing these touches more than she should, storing them away like precious things. They reached Helena at dusk on the second day, and Emily Harper met them at a respectable boarding house she'd arranged, far from the seedier establishments that catered to miners and railroad workers. The trial begins tomorrow at 9, Emily said, leading them to their separate rooms with propriety that would satisfy even the strictest social conventions. My lawyer, Mr. Harrison, wants to meet with you tonight to review testimony. Clara, he'll be direct and potentially harsh. He needs to prepare you for what Burke's lawyer will ask. Mr. Harrison proved to be a thin, intense man in his 50s with sharp eyes that missed nothing. He set up in the boarding house parlor and proceeded to interrogate Clara with a ruthlessness that made the actual trial seem almost merciful by comparison. Why did you enter the Golden Bell Saloon? He demanded. I had nowhere else to go, no money for lodging, no prospects for employment. So you chose a saloon, not the church, not a charitable organization. The church was locked. The boarding houses refused me. The saloon was open. And you went upstairs to Burke's private rooms. Why? Clara forced herself to meet his gaze. He told me he had an available room and wanted to show it to me before offering employment. Did you understand the implications of a single woman going to a private room with a saloon owner? I understood I was desperate and running out of options, Clara said, her voice steady despite the heat in her cheeks. I made the best choice I could with the information and circumstances I had. Harrison's expression didn't soften. Burke's lawyer will paint that choice as evidence of poor moral judgment. He'll suggest you knew exactly what kind of employment Burke was offering and accepted it willingly. Then I'll tell the truth, that I believed I was accepting work as a piano player, nothing more. The truth isn't always enough. Harrison leaned forward. Juries see what they want to see. A respectable woman doesn't end up in a saloon unless she's already fallen. That's what they'll think, and Burke's lawyer will encourage it. Cal, who'd been listening from across the room, spoke up. Then we make them see differently. We show them what happened after the saloon, how Clara protected herself, how she took legitimate employment, how she's been teaching my sons and maintaining a household properly. Which brings us to the other problem, Harrison said. Your living arrangement. An unmarried woman living with an unmarried man, no matter how innocent the circumstances, creates exactly the kind of scandal Burke needs to win his case. We've been through this, Cal said, his voice hardening. We're not getting married to satisfy legal convenience. Harrison studied them both with eyes that saw too much. I'm not suggesting you should. I'm simply warning you that your refusal to do so will be used against you. Burke's lawyer will argue that if the arrangement were truly innocent, marriage would be the natural solution. Your resistance to it suggests something improper worth hiding. Clara felt frustration boil over. So if we marry, we're admitting impropriety. If we don't marry, we're hiding impropriety. There's no winning position here. Welcome to frontier law, Harrison said dryly. The system isn't designed to protect women in your position, Miss Bellamy. It's designed to punish them for making choices that fall outside narrow social acceptability. Your best hope is that the judge values evidence over prejudice, and that we can present your case compellingly enough to overcome the natural bias. He spent the next 2 hours drilling Clara on testimony, teaching her how to answer questions directly without volunteering information, how to maintain composure under hostile examination, how to redirect inappropriate questions back to facts rather than speculation. By the time he finished, Clara's head ached and her confidence had been systematically dismantled and rebuilt into something harder and more resilient. Get some rest, Harrison said finally. Tomorrow will be brutal, and you'll need every ounce of strength. That night, Clara lay in her narrow boarding house bed and stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep despite exhaustion. Through the thin walls, she could hear other lodgers moving about, the sounds of a city that never fully slept. It was so different from the ranch, where night brought silence broken only by wind and animal sounds. She thought about the boys, hoping they weren't too frightened without Cal. She thought about the barn, partially rebuilt but still incomplete. She thought about the life she'd built over the past months. The teaching, the household work, the quiet satisfaction of belonging somewhere after so long feeling adrift. And she thought about Cal, sleeping in a room down the hall, close enough to reach but separated by walls and propriety and his own determined distance. The courtroom was smaller than Clara expected and more crowded. Word of the trial had spread, and spectators filled every available seat, townspeople, reporters, curious observers drawn by scandal, like moths to flame. Clara recognized some faces from Bitterroot, including several women who'd refused her lodging when she'd first arrived. Burke's lawyer was a florid man named Pemberton, who wore expensive Eastern clothes and carried himself with the aggressive confidence of someone accustomed to winning. He smiled at Clara as she entered, a predator's smile that made her skin crawl. The judge was elderly and stern, his weathered face suggesting years of frontier service. Judge Aldrich, Harrison had said, was fair but conservative, unlikely to be swayed by emotional appeals but potentially responsive to solid evidence. The proceedings began with Pemberton's opening statement, a masterful performance that painted Clara as a conniving woman who deliberately sought employment in a saloon, signed a binding contract, then fled when her moral inadequacies became apparent. He described Burke as a legitimate businessman victimized by a dishonest employee, and Cal as either a dupe or a willing participant in harboring stolen property. Harrison's response was more restrained but equally pointed. He outlined Clara's situation, abandoned by a fraudulent fiancé, desperate for survival, deceived by Burke about the nature of employment, and rescued by an honorable man offering legitimate work. Then the testimony began, and Clara understood why Harrison had been so brutal in his preparation. Pemberton called witnesses who'd seen Clara enter the Golden Bell, who'd watched her play piano, who'd observed her going upstairs with Burke. Each account was technically accurate, but framed to suggest impropriety. The testimony implied things without stating them outright, creating an atmosphere of scandal through innuendo. When Clara finally took the stand, Pemberton approached with theatrical courtesy that barely concealed contempt. "Miss Bellamy, you testified that you were seeking respectable employment when you entered my client's establishment. Is that correct?" "Yes." "And you believed a saloon was the appropriate place to seek such employment?" "I believed it was the only place still open and willing to consider hiring me." "I see." "And when Mr. Burke offered to show you a private room, you willingly accompanied him upstairs?" Clara forced herself to remain calm. "He said he had a room available and wanted to show it before discussing employment terms. I saw no reason to refuse." "No reason? A young woman, alone with a man she'd just met, going to his private quarters? You saw nothing inappropriate in that situation?" "I saw desperation," Clara said quietly. "I saw a choice between accepting his offer or spending the night on the street with no money and no protection. Perhaps I should have chosen differently, but I did the best I could with the options available." Pemberton's smile widened. Desperation. An interesting defense. "Tell me, Miss Bellamy, did this desperation also lead you to sign an employment contract with my client?" "I never signed any contract." "Yet Mr. Burke has produced a document bearing your signature, agreeing to 6 months of employment at specified wages. Are you claiming this document is fraudulent?" "I'm stating a fact. I never signed any contract with Mr. Burke." Pemberton produced the document in question, holding it up for the court. "This is your signature, is it not?" Clara looked at it carefully, her heart sinking. The signature resembled hers, similar enough to be convincing to someone who didn't know her handwriting intimately. "It looks like my signature," she admitted, "but I didn't write it. I never signed that document." "How convenient. A contract exists bearing your name, but you claim no knowledge of it. Tell me, Miss Bellamy, how many other contracts might you have signed and forgotten about?" Harrison objected, and the judge sustained it, but the damage was done. The jury, 12 men, all frontier types who probably had strong opinions about women's proper roles, looked skeptical. Pemberton continued, his questions growing increasingly pointed, until Harrison's objections came faster, and the judge finally called a recess. During the break, Emily Harper appeared with unexpected news. "My investigators found something," she said, pulling Harrison and Clara aside. "Burke's been running this scheme in multiple towns, bringing in desperate women, forging employment contracts, then using those contracts to extort money or services. We found 3 other cases in Colorado and Wyoming with identical documentation." Harrison's eyes lit up. "Do you have proof?" "Affidavits from 2 of the women and copies of their forged contracts. The handwriting analysis shows the same person forged all the signatures." Emily's expression was triumphant. "Burke's not just a saloon owner exploiting one woman. He's a systematic predator with a documented pattern of fraud."
This story
"Can we
was
introduce
posted
this
on the
evidence?"
channel The Rusty
Clara asked.
Saddle. Please do
"Already
not
petitioned
repost
the
it
judge,"
in any
Harrison
form.
said. "If he allows it, Pemberton's entire case collapses." The afternoon session began with Harrison presenting Emily's evidence. Pemberton objected strenuously, arguing that other cases were irrelevant to Clara's specific situation, but Judge Aldrich reviewed the documents with careful attention. "I'm going to allow this evidence," he said finally. "Pattern of behavior is relevant to credibility assessment. Mr. Harrison, you may proceed." Harrison called Emily to the stand and had her outline the investigation's findings. The other women's testimonies were read into the record, and handwriting experts testified about the forged signatures. The case shifted from Clara's character to Burke's systematic fraud. Pemberton fought back by calling Cal to the stand, trying to paint him as an opportunist who'd taken advantage of Clara's vulnerability. "Mr. Redfeather, you offered Miss Bellamy employment after knowing her for less than 2 hours. Isn't that rather precipitous?" "I needed a teacher," Cal said calmly. "She was qualified. The timing was coincidence." "Coincidence? You rescued her from a difficult situation and immediately offered her employment that required living in your home, caring for your children, functioning essentially as a wife without the legal protections marriage provides. That seems less like coincidence and more like exploitation." Cal's expression hardened. "I offered honest work for honest wages. Miss Bellamy has been an excellent teacher and household employee. There's been nothing improper in our arrangement. Then why not marry her? If the situation is as innocent as you claim, marriage would eliminate all questions of propriety." The courtroom went silent, everyone waiting for Cal's answer. Clara held her breath, wondering what he'd say. Cal looked directly at Pemberton. "Because Miss Bellamy isn't property to be claimed or reputation to be managed. She's a person with her own choices and her own future. I offered employment, not entrapment. If she chooses to leave tomorrow, she's free to go. That's what honorable men do. They give women choices, not obligations." Something shifted in the courtroom's atmosphere. Several jury members sat up straighter, their expressions thoughtful rather than judgmental. Pemberton tried to recover. "Very noble, Mr. Redfeather, but the fact remains that you've benefited considerably from this arrangement. A teacher for your children, household help, companionship. One might argue you've gained far more than Miss Bellamy has." "One might argue that," Cal agreed. "But one would be wrong. Miss Bellamy has given my sons their voices back. She's taught them to read and write. She's made our house a home instead of just a place we survive. Whatever I've gained, she's earned 10 times over through her work and her courage." He turned to look directly at Clara for the first time since the trial began, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "She fought armed men to protect my children," Cal continued, his voice steady but carrying emotion that couldn't be hidden. "She stitched my wounds when I was bleeding. She chose to stay when leaving would have been safer and easier. So no, Mr. Pemberton, I haven't exploited her. If anything, I'm the one who's benefited from her strength and her refusal to give up when the world tried to break her." The courtroom remained silent for several heartbeats. Then Judge Aldrich cleared his throat. "I think we've heard enough for today. We'll reconvene tomorrow morning for closing arguments." That evening, Clara and Cal walked through Helena's streets without speaking, both processing the day's testimony. The city glittered with lamplight, saloons and hotels doing brisk business, the kind of frontier prosperity that attracted both opportunity and exploitation. "Thank you," Clara said finally, "for what you said in court. You didn't have to defend me so strongly." "I told the truth," Cal said simply. "Everything I said was true." They walked further in silence, then Cal stopped abruptly, turning to face her. "I need to tell you something, and I need to say it before tomorrow's verdict, because if Burke wins, you might leave, and I'll have lost my chance." Clara's heart hammered. "What is it?" Cal seemed to struggle with words, his usual stoic expression cracking to show something vulnerable beneath. "Emily was right about one thing. Marriage would solve legal problems. But that's not why I've been thinking about it." "Cal, let me finish, please." He took a breath. "When you first came to the ranch, I told myself it was just employment. You needed work, I needed help, everything was practical and straightforward. But somewhere between teaching the boys and rebuilding the barn and fighting off Burke's men together, it stopped being just employment." Clara couldn't breathe, couldn't move, could only stare at him as he continued. "You scare me," Cal admitted. "The way I feel about you scares me. My wife died. And I swore I'd never put myself through that grief again, never care about someone enough to be destroyed when they leave. But you walked into my life wearing a wedding dress meant for another man, and somehow you made me want things I thought I'd buried with her." "What things?" Clara whispered. "Partnership. Companionship. Someone to share the weight instead of carrying everything alone." Cal's hand came up to touch her cheek, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "I'm not asking for your answer tonight. I'm just asking you to know that when this trial is over, whether Burke wins or loses, I want you to stay. Not as my employee, as my wife, as my partner, as the person who makes my sons laugh and my house feel like home, and my life feel like something more than just survival." Clara felt tears spill over, soaking into his hand. "I thought you didn't want marriage. You said it so clearly, so many times. I didn't want obligation without choice. I didn't want you to feel trapped." Cal's voice roughened. "But if you choose me, if you want this life we're building together, then I'm asking, not because of courts or scandal or legal protection, because I love you, and I think maybe you might love me too." Clara laughed through her tears, the sound half sob and half joy. "I've been falling in love with you since you punched that drunk man in the saloon and took me home with your boys clinging to your legs. I just thought I was alone in it." Cal's smile transformed his face, making him look younger and lighter than she'd ever seen. "You're never alone in anything, not anymore." He kissed her then, right there on Helena's main street with lamplight spilling around them and people walking past. It was gentle and fierce at the same time, carrying months of restrained feelings finally given permission to exist. When they finally pulled apart, Clara was shaking. "Yes, the answer is yes. To partnership and marriage and building a life together. Yes to all of it." Cal pulled her close, his arms solid and safe around her. "After the trial. We'll do this properly, with the boys present and vows that mean something. But I needed you to know before tomorrow so that whatever happens, you understand you're not fighting alone." The next morning, both lawyers presented closing arguments. Pemberton made a final attempt to paint Clara as a scheming woman of loose morals, but his arguments sounded hollow against the evidence of Burke's systematic fraud. Harrison methodically dismantled Burke's case, showing the forged contract, the predatory pattern, the manipulation of desperate women. Judge Aldrich listened impassively, then addressed the jury with instructions about evidence, credibility, and the burden of proof. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. "We find in favor of the defendant, Miss Clara Bellamy," the foreman announced. "No debt is owed, and we recommend criminal charges be filed against Nathaniel Burke for fraud and forgery." The courtroom erupted in noise, some disappointed, others approving. Clara felt her legs go weak with relief. Cal's hand found hers beneath the table, squeezing tight. But Judge Aldrich wasn't finished. He banged his gavel for silence. "I'm entering additional orders," he said. "Based on the evidence presented, I'm issuing arrest warrants for Nathaniel Burke on multiple counts of fraud and coercion. I'm also referring this case to federal authorities for investigation into possible human trafficking violations. And I'm putting the territorial marshal on notice that any further harassment of Miss Bellamy or the Red Feather family will result in immediate prosecution for witness intimidation." He looked directly at Clara. "Miss Bellamy, you showed considerable courage in standing up to systematic exploitation. The frontier needs more women and men willing to fight for what's right regardless of social consequences. This court apologizes for whatever additional trauma these proceedings may have caused and wishes you well in your future endeavors." Outside the courthouse, Emily Harper was waiting with a telegram. "Burke was arrested in Denver this morning. Federal marshals acted on the evidence we provided. He'll face charges in multiple territories." Clara felt something loosen in her chest.
This story
The fear
was
that had
posted
been
on
her
the channel
constant
The Rusty
companion since
Saddle.
that first
Please do
night
not
at the Golden
repost
Bell
it in
finally
any form.
releasing its grip. "It's over," she said wonderingly. "Not quite over," Emily corrected with a smile. "But the dangerous part is finished. Now comes the rebuilding." They returned to Bitterroot 3 days later, after stopping at the territorial office to file official documents that would prevent any future legal harassment. The boys came running when the wagon pulled into the ranch yard, both talking over each other in their excitement. "Miss Clara, Papa, you're back. We were so worried. Sarah taught us multiplication tables. Did the judge put the bad men in jail?" Cal scooped them both up despite his still healing ribs. The judge put Burke in jail where he belongs, and Miss Clara won her case completely. Eli looked between them with the sharp perception of children who sense adult undercurrents. Are you going to stay forever now? Clara knelt to their level. Actually, I need to talk to you both about that. Your father asked me to marry him, which means I wouldn't be your teacher anymore. I'd be your stepmother, but only if you're comfortable with that change. This is your home first, and your feelings matter most. The boys exchanged one of their silent communications, then launched themselves at Clara with enough force to knock her backward. They clung to her, both crying and laughing at the same time. Does this mean you're really staying? Jonah asked through tears. Really staying, Clara confirmed. No more leaving. This is my home too now. They were married 2 weeks later in the valley near the ranch, with Sarah Chen standing as witness, and the boys holding the simple gold rings Cal had purchased in Helena. The ceremony was brief and heartfelt, conducted by the traveling minister who'd finally returned from his extended circuit. Cal's vows were simple. I promise to be your partner in all things, to respect your choices, to stand beside you in difficulty and celebrate with you in joy. I promise to love you as you deserve, completely and without reservation. Clara's vows matched his. I promise to build this life with you, to care for your sons as my own, to face whatever comes with courage and honesty. I promise to love you not because it's easy, but because it's true. The boys cheered when Cal kissed his new wife, and for the first time since Clara had stepped off that train in a wedding dress meant for another man, she felt the future open before her like a promise that might actually be kept. 6 months later, Clara stood in the doorway of the newly rebuilt barn, watching Cal work with the boys on fence repair. The morning was bright and clear, the kind of Montana summer day that made all the hard times worth enduring. A letter had arrived that morning from Emily Harper, containing unexpected news. Burke had been convicted on all charges and sentenced to 15 years in territorial prison. Moreover, the investigation into his fraud scheme had uncovered enough assets to compensate his victims. Clara's share was $500, exactly the amount Burke had fraudulently claimed she owed him. You could use this to start that school you've been planning, Cal had said, reading the letter over her shoulder. Clara had already been planning it, a small school for frontier children whose families couldn't afford private education or who were excluded from town schools because of race or circumstance. She'd mentioned it to Cal in passing, not expecting him to remember. But of course he'd remembered. He remembered everything that mattered to her. The school was Clara's idea, but it became a family project. Cal built the schoolhouse using lumber from their own land, his hands creating something beautiful and functional that would outlast them all. The boys helped paint and furnish it, their enthusiasm infectious. Even Sarah Chen contributed, donating books and supplies from her store. They opened the Red Feather School for frontier children on a crisp autumn morning, with 15 students ranging from 6 to 14 years old. Half were white, a quarter were mixed blood like Eli and Jonah, and the remainder were Chinese, Mexican, and one full-blood Crow girl whose parents had heard about the school that accepted everyone. Clara stood at the front of the classroom and felt something settle into place, a sense of purpose that had been missing since her father's scandal destroyed her Philadelphia life. This was better. This was real. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the valley, Cal pulled Clara close against his side. Tired? He asked. Exhausted, Clara admitted, but it's the good kind of tired, the kind that comes from doing meaningful work. The boys were proud of you today. I heard them telling the other students that their mama is the best teacher in Montana. Clara smiled at the word mama, still new enough to feel precious. The boys had started using it naturally about a month after the wedding, and Clara had cried the first time she heard it. What about their papa? She teased. What do they say about him? That I'm too strict about chores and not nearly as good at storytelling as you are. Cal's voice carried amusement. Also that I make terrible biscuits. All true statements. Cal laughed, the sound still rare enough to feel like a gift. I have news too. The territorial government approved my petition. The ranch is now officially registered in both our names. Equal ownership, equal say in all decisions. Clara turned to look at him in surprise. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. We're partners, Clara. In everything. That means the ranch is as much yours as mine, legally and practically. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. Besides, you've put as much work into rebuilding it as I have. More, probably, considering you're running a school at the same time. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness claimed the valley, stars appearing one by one in the vast Montana sky. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and Cal's hand tightened fractionally on Clara's before relaxing when no answering call came. "Do you ever regret it?" Clara asked quietly. "Taking me in that night at the saloon? All the trouble that followed?" Cal was quiet for a long moment, considering. "No, not once. You brought light back to this house when I thought it would be dark forever. You gave my sons their voices and their future. You made me remember that life is more than just surviving." He shifted to face her more fully, his expression serious in the starlight. "That night at the Golden Bell, I walked in looking for information about a teacher. What I found was you, scared and brave and refusing to give up despite everything being stacked against you. I knew right then you were stronger than you realized. I just had to wait for you to see it too." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "I was so lost. If you hadn't intervened—" "But I did, and you fought your way out. You did that, Clara. You made the choice to stay, to fight, to build something better. I just gave you the opportunity." Cal's thumb brushed away a tear that had escaped. "We saved each other, I think. You from Burke's trap, me from loneliness I'd convinced myself was inevitable." A sound from inside the house interrupted them, Eli calling that Jonah had hidden his book again, and it wasn't fair. Clara smiled, recognizing the familiar evening routine of sibling disagreement. "I should go referee before it escalates to actual combat," she said. Cal caught her hand before she could stand. "In a minute. I want to say something first." Clara settled back against him, waiting. 3 years ago, I lost everything I thought mattered. My wife died, and I believed I'd never be whole again. I built walls so high that nothing could touch me, including my own sons. Cal's voice was rough with emotion. Then you appeared in a wedding dress meant for someone else, and somehow you scaled those walls without even trying. You made me want to be whole again. You made me believe in second chances. He turned her face toward his eyes reflecting starlight. "I love you, Clara Redfeather. Not because you saved me, but because you're you, stubborn and brave and infinitely kind. You're the partner I needed and the love I'd stopped believing was possible. Thank you for choosing this life with me." Clara kissed him, pouring into it everything she couldn't quite express in words. Gratitude and love and fierce joy at having found home in the last place she'd expected. When they finally pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his. "I love you too, and I'd choose you again every single time." From inside the house, the boys' argument had shifted to laughter, the kind of pure childhood joy that spoke of security and happiness. Through the window, Clara could see them wrestling playfully, their earlier dispute already forgotten. "We should probably intervene before they break something," Cal said without moving. "Probably," Clara agreed, also not moving. "In just a minute." They sat together on the porch as night deepened, holding each other against the cooling air, listening to their son's laughter and the wind in the grass, and the sounds of a life built from the ashes of abandoned plans and broken promises. It wasn't the life Clara had imagined when she stepped off that train in a wedding dress, desperate and alone. It was infinitely better. Years later, when people asked Clara about her arrival in Montana Territory, she'd tell them the truth, that she'd been abandoned, betrayed, and nearly destroyed by men who saw her as property rather than a person. She'd talk about the Golden Bell Saloon and Nathaniel Burke's trap, about the terror of facing armed men and the pain of having her character dissected in court. But she'd also tell them about
This story
Cal's
was
quiet
posted on the
courage,
channel The
about
Rusty
2
Saddle.
boys who'd learned
Please
to
do not
speak again through
repost
love
it
and
in any
patience,
form.
about Emily Harper's unexpected intervention and Sarah Chen's steady friendship. She'd describe building a school that welcomed children the world wanted to exclude, and a ranch that became a refuge for those who needed second chances. And she'd tell them that sometimes the worst moments of your life are the ones that lead you exactly where you were always meant to be. The Red Feather School operated for 30 years, educating hundreds of frontier children regardless of race, gender, or circumstance. Eli became a lawyer who fought territorial injustice, with the same quiet determination his father had shown. Jonah became a writer whose stories about frontier life brought understanding between cultures that had too often viewed each other with suspicion and fear. Cal and Clara worked the ranch until age made the labor impossible, then passed it to their children, not just Eli and Jonah, but the three daughters who came later, filling the house with noise and love and the kind of chaos that only large families manage. On Clara's 70th birthday, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and former students who'd traveled from across the territory to celebrate, someone asked if she'd ever regretted leaving Philadelphia. Clara looked around at the faces she loved, Cal beside her with silver threading through his dark hair, their children and grandchildren filling the house they'd built together, the school still operating in the valley below, and smiled. "Not once," she said, "not even for a moment." And it was true. The woman who'd stepped off a train in a wedding dress meant for another man, desperate and terrified and convinced her life was over, had been transformed into someone stronger. Not through rescue, but through her own choices. Not through surrender, but through fighting for what she deserved. She'd been forsaken at the altar, abandoned at a train station, and nearly destroyed by those who saw her vulnerability as weakness. But she'd survived. She'd fought. She'd loved. And in the end, she'd built a life worth living on her own terms, with a partner who respected her strength and children who carried forward the values she'd fought so hard to protect. It was more than enough. It was everything.